Chapter 851. Advantage is mine. The next day, outside the Agaleo fortress, the center of the camp of the Alliance Army of all countries. In the hastily constructed strategy meeting hall, kings and generals gathered once again. The noise and arguments rose and fell, occasionally accompanied by the sound of shields colliding. These were the heroes of all countries testing their strength. Since words could not achieve superiority, they could only resolve the matter with fists. After a long time, accompanied by a muffled shout, the meeting hall quieted for a moment and then returned to its clamor. However, before long, Odysseus strode out from the side door of the temporary structure. His expression showed no unusual signs, as if he had just left due to an urgent matter. Yet as Odysseus's longtime friend, Mode immediately noticed something was amiss. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Stepping forward to greet him, Mode's expression became equally grim. But Odysseus just waved his hand, stopping his friend's baseless speculation. "Nothing of the sort. It's just some conflicts over interests, not enough to escalate to that point. But I must say, there are so many heroes in the world, and I am not the only gifted demigod." Nodding in agreement, Mode knew that Odysseus had probably suffered a small setback, but he could understand. After all, he was well aware of Odysseus's eloquence. If it came to sophistry and strategy, few could match him. However, this was chaos. If one couldn't gain the upper hand, most would resort to force. And in this regard, Odysseus indeed did not have the advantage. "It doesn't matter. Relax, after all, it's just some inconclusive debates. Whether you participate or not makes no difference. Although the Agaleo Mountains aren't an insurmountable natural barrier, if we want to forcibly capture them, everyone will have to put their elite troops on the table. But who would be willing to do that? Instead of a direct assault, it's better to wait for the aid of the gods. Yet some are unwilling to choose this either. For instance, King Agamemnon of Mycenae, who, despite his title as the leader of the alliance, has achieved nothing so far, and he doesn't want to rely on divine intervention. And those foolish Spartans, while other countries have at least a handful of conscripted soldiers, they have none. I can't help but laugh when I think of their so-called suicidal tradition, and it's even funnier that while everyone thinks only those who worship the war god could act like this, who would have thought they are actually believers of the sun, ha ha ha. Unable to hold back his laughter, Mode found the Spartans hard to understand. The Spartans' madness was long-standing. It was said they began weeding out at the birth of infants. Newborns were immediately dipped in nectar. If they showed spasms or died, then the child wasn't fit to grow up. And even if their bodies were healthy enough, their fate was still death. As for the qualified ones, they weren't entirely safe either. They would be trained as warriors. Starting at the age of 7, these children, just beginning to recognize the world, were taken away from their parents and put into military education. Whipping, training, obedience. At 12, when they hadn't yet left descendants, these young ones were required to survive alone in the wild. In the end, most died as a result, with only a few surviving to adulthood. Only after such elimination were the Spartans acknowledged and became true soldiers. Such a cruel system brought about the wild strength of every Spartan, but it also inevitably became a source of ridicule. Without external enemies, they killed each other more than any natural disasters combined. Moreover, the most incongruous fact was that, compared to Ares, the sun god Apollo held a higher position in Sparta. In terms of culture and festivals, they preferred to worship the sun instead of the war god who equally loved ruthless slaughter. Heh. Mode, don't speak recklessly. The Spartans aren't to be trifled with. If they do come looking for trouble, the most I can do is persuade them to be gentle. An earnest smile appeared on Odysseus's lips as he shook his head. In truth, he didn't quite understand the Spartan mindset either. After all, for a kingdom, isn't population its most precious asset? But that had nothing to do with him. Spartans were few in number, but no one wanted to provoke them. What truly concerned him now was what had transpired in the camp earlier. All right, Mode. It's not those things that I'm worried about. In fact, the countries have reached an agreement just now. Troy's king has relented, He is actually willing to lead the main attack. Although he also required the countries to display real strength to undermine the Athenians' defenses, it still puzzled me. In a slow tone, Odysseus voiced his objection. He believed they should wait for the gods before launching a true offensive, but the outcome was disappointing. For even with divine intervention, attacking a city would still command a great cost from the countries. Since someone was willing to take the lead now, there was no reason to refuse. Hence, Odysseus's idea was rejected, and some even ridiculed him for his cowardice. So Odysseus decided to step out for a walk. If he couldn't change the outcome, he would reserve his opinion. Troy! Raising an eyebrow, Mode was also somewhat surprised. However, this name only flashed through his mind briefly before being cast aside. I remember you said that the previous king of the Trojans once employed the gods. So it's not strange that they'd now choose to atone for that. Priam isn't a fool. Besides, what does it matter to us what he does? Maybe I'm overthinking it. After all, no one can truly see through another person. Perhaps my understanding of Laomedon's son is indeed lacking. After a moment of silence, Odysseus still had a bad feeling, but couldn't pinpoint the issue. Explaining it simply as this doesn't seem like a choice that king would make seem too presumptuous. Why should he judge what choices others would make? This was one of the reasons Odysseus didn't continue and decisively left. All right, let's leave it at that. We should go prepare for what we must do. A true siege requires more than just a lead attacker. Speaking in a low voice, Odysseus turned around. The Trojans were willing to be the main force. They also had to cooperate well. And besides, he also needed to instruct his troops. Whether or not there was an issue, it wouldn't hurt to take extra precautions. Ha ha ha. Well said. Yes, I'd say he's probably scared out of his wits by some lunatic from God knows where, hesitant with everyone he encounters now. I've heard of his name. Even as a prince, his wisdom was renowned. But now it seems intelligence doesn't equal courage, and knowledge might not lead to the right judgment. King Priam has already agreed to take on the heavy task, yet he denies, without the gods' favor, are we truly powerless against the Athenians? Ridiculous. If we can't even get past here, how will we ever conquer the more strategic Athens? In the hall, the clinking of glasses and cups mingled. Odysseus's departure did not affect the atmosphere inside. The kings and heroes of all countries were drinking merrily, celebrating their rare consensus. As for the departed Odysseus, he naturally became the subject of gossip and was sneered at. After all, heroes had always acted impulsively in chaos, and those overly cautious were instead seen as symbols of cowardice. King Priam, the courage of the Trojans is truly surprising. However, as long as this fortress is successfully breached, your contributions to this battle will be paramount. I believe at that time, the gods will see your devout faith and reward Troy accordingly. That would be the best outcome. Raising his cup, Priam drank it all in one go. Meanwhile, sitting at the head of the table, Agamemnon finally relaxed a bit. As the king of Mycenae, Agamemnon did harbor doubts about such a drastic change in attitude. But once he thought it over, he realized there was nothing to worry about. On one hand, Priam, not being here by choice, had the motive to establish merit. On the other, whatever results he achieved wouldn't affect him anyway. If successful as the nominal interim commander of the alliance, it would reflect his competence. If unsuccessful, well, once the gods arrived, decisions wouldn't be his to make, so why worry about the outcome? Anyway, the worst result wouldn't be too bad, unless the Trojans intended to betray the Olympian gods. Heh! Thinking of this, Agamemnon shook his head. That was impossible. After all, there was only one Athena, goddess of wisdom. With such a disparity in the number of main gods, how could she possibly win? Everyone. Rising from his seat, Agamemnon raised his glass. At that moment, the tall, middle-aged king exuded solemn majesty, slowly surveying everyone present. Boosting morale was his final task. Everyone, I know, the strength of the Athenians is no secret. On the contrary, not long ago, my own soldiers faced a defeat. He couldn't foresee the Athenians' scheme and ultimately met failure. Our recent sieges have also been unsuccessful. But what I want to say is, now it's different. Gradually raising his voice, Agamemnon himself felt a surge of enthusiasm. If the fortress fell, perhaps he would personally don armor and attempt to capture that newly ascended king. Months ago, we belonged to different countries, but one morning, the oracles of the gods descended to earth. Since then, the alliance gathered, its sword pointed east. By contrast, Athens' former king is dead. And while their soldiers may be elite, they are outnumbered and overstretched. Draining his cup, Agamemnon drew his sword. A powerful aura of bloodlust emanated from him, amplifying his voice. No matter how it unfolds, this battle is between all countries and one country. The advantage is ours. As long as everyone gives their best, there will naturally be no other choice for the final victors. That was Agamemnon's belief and thoughts. If only everyone had given their all earlier, they wouldn't still be stuck outside the city today. Listening to the rallying cries from outside the tent, Agamemnon slowly sheathed his sword. Listening to these countless voices, how many men does Athens have guarding the city? Even if it's 10 against 1, this time they were bound to win. Chapter 852 Charge. After many days of delay and considerable expense, the plan to besiege the city had finally yielded a result. When the nations dispersed, their forces regrouped at once, inspiring and rewarding their soldiers. Although the Trojans were willing to undertake the crucial task, it did not mean that the other kingdoms could relax. A vast number of armies, harbingers of gruesome conflict, prepared to pave the way for the offensive led by Priam's son, Hector. When the sun rose again from the east, countless dark spots approached again from afar, nearing the pass in the Aigaleo Mountains. There were no exchanges, no superfluous movements. The roar of battle cries sliced through the clouds and slowly drew closer to the fortress. Under the watchful eyes of the church priests, the loosely formed soldiers struck against the stone city walls like a tide against a dam. Arrows imbued with elements fell from the high walls, then were weakened by 90% by various divine lights and soaring vital energies. Only the remaining force hit the dispersed line of soldiers, leaving dozens of corpses on the ground. Indeed, it seems, just as Lord Ilos said, the alliance is indeed ready to launch a real assault. At least from the current stance, they clearly no longer care about sustaining some casualties. Dressed in military attire, the sword hanging at her waist, Andrea stood atop the watchtower of the fortress, overseeing the entire situation. Unlike before, this time the Allied forces evidently moved beyond mere probing. Just looking at these advancing soldiers, one could tell they were different from those before. Our knights are also ready. As long as there's no issue on the other side, we will follow at once. Of course, the Trojans are not foolish, and their current king is not a madman like his father. It's just that between the life of his lineage and his kingdom, he will ultimately choose himself. After all, only if he survives, Troy remains his country. Standing high and looking far, as the planner and executor of this entire strategy, Iapetus was naturally present here observing. Everything was moving in the direction he wanted, as he had said. Yet while responding to Andrea, the god of speech also noticed the caution and doubt underlying her words. Yes, doubt, but that was perfectly normal. After all, even setting aside himself, Priam's stance was in fact quite indeterminate. No one knew whether he had truly made up his mind, apart from Iapetus, who was certain that his speech had taken effect. Even the wisest of rulers might suspect this to be a deception. The Trojans could change their stance at any time, and Athens had no room for error. Your Majesty, for now, wait. Priam is not someone who treats death lightly. Otherwise, on the day he ascended to the throne, he could have sacrificed his life to atone to the deities, which would have been enough to reverse the Olympian gods' prejudice against their kingdom. Since he has not done so, it demonstrates that at least he does not wish to die yet. Speaking soothingly, Iapetus slowly continued. No matter how, in this battle both sides find the prepared pitted against the unprepared. The elite against the unguarded, the advantage lies with us. If we find the right moment to strike from the city, although it is not possible to completely defeat the armies of all countries, we can instill distrust among them, ensuring they can no longer trust one another. Indeed. What Lord Ilos says is sensible. Nodding slightly, after all, in various senses, the god of speech, now in human form, was a vassal of Athens. Andrea vehemently expressed her trust and approval, but also quietly gripped her treasured sword. Theseus's legacy, the symbol of future kings of Athens. A connected feeling traveled up from the sword hilt, the power of lineage pulsating through it. Unless something unexpected happens, today Andrea would personally enter the fray. If Priam acts accordingly, she would naturally amplify the results. She would personally enter the battlefield, doing what she usually disliked. But if it turns out to be false, there would be no difference. After all, as the monarch of this era, whether victorious or defeated, there was never a reason to merely watch while warriors risked their lives. Hiss hiss. Quiet. She softly chided, slightly releasing her own presence. Several miles behind the alliance, Hector soothingly patted his steed, born of the 6th generation divine blood. Gazing towards the ongoing battle in the distance, the young hero's eyes were bright. Before long, he would be fighting there. Father, have you really made up your mind? Thousands of the most elite knights followed behind Hector. Strictly speaking, they were all kindred by blood. After all, in this era, most aristocrats bore divine blood, differentiated only in potency. Shared lineage and relentless training resulted in a formidable unity and invincible might. For Hector, it was no surprise. If he were to lead them in a desperate charge without regard for the lives of the knights behind him, even the fortress built on the Aigaleo Mountains would be breached by their formidable power. This was what the Alliance hoped he would do, yet it was also what they always shirked. After all, the effect of power was never one-directional. Hence, when the earth energies of the high mountain were recklessly shattered by the power of the demigod lineage, the resultant backlash would not be bearable by ordinary people. Hector might not die, but he would definitely be injured. And on the battlefield, the one who is injured is often in the most peril. The knights behind him would suffer as well, their unified aura briefly and completely disrupted. Scattered knights amounted to little more than marginally effective soldiers. Father, I rarely question your decisions. But you must understand, the kingdom is far from Athens but near to the mountain of the gods. If we truly take this step, unless the goddess of wisdom and Athens truly win the final victory in this war, no matter the outcome, Troy will inevitably pay a price. I know. Whispering, Priam looked at his son. He was shrouded in armor and helmet, his original appearance no longer discernible. Yet, through the gaps in his faceplate, Hector's eyes were still visible. My child, I hope you remember that we are demigods. God King Zeus is our ancestor, just like those other kingdoms. Therefore, we have become monarchs of a nation and have ruled them until today. But what does that matter? Of course it does, because kingdoms exist only because demigods existed first. His voice wasn't loud, but it was very forceful. Taking a deep breath, Priam shared his internal deliberations. Gods existed before humans. Therefore, if humans can't give faith to gods, then humans' existence is meaningless to gods. As beings between humans and gods, it's the demigods that led to the formation of families and nations. If a kingdom can't serve my purpose, what use is it to me? So, my child, ask yourself, if this were not your kingdom, if it were for Phoenicia, Qatar, or some other country, would you still be willing to fight to the death, until the end of your life? There was no response. Hector's eyes under his faceplate looked back at his father. He didn't know if Priam truly felt this way, or if it was just a simple fear of death. But regardless, if he could forsake his father's life, how could he be eligible to struggle for Troy? If he could give up his father for the kingdom, then he could abandon the kingdom for humanity. Hector didn't consider himself to be so noble. Hence he simply nodded and then tightened his grip on his weapon. I will bring us victory, father. Go! Priam nodded in relief and promised, "Go! Go win the glory that belongs to you. Victory will eventually be ours, but I will age, and you will be crowned king." Hector didn't reply. He wanted to say he wasn't fighting for succession, but after thinking, he decided not to refuse. Lifting his spear slightly, the next moment, a surge of fiery blood erupted around him. Almost simultaneously, as if a signal was given, the uniform sound of metal clashes rang out. Thousands of knights clad in heavy armor lowered their visors and lifted their weapons. Even without extraordinary power, even placed in the mortal realm of later ages, when thousands of heavily armored knights started moving, there were few countries in the same era that could match them. The confusing threads of destiny allowed this scene to unfold in the era of classical mythology, and the battlefield under Aigaleo Mountains was their stage. Justice, mercy, fearless, sacrifice. 7 streaks of divine light fell upon thousands, and at this moment, the priests sent by the Alliance army of all countries had no idea what the knights before them were about to do. They simply followed the requests of the kings from various countries and bestowed the blessings of deities. Until all blessings had ended, Hector's eyes finally turned cold, because he knew these priests were not deities nor among the few who could directly communicate with gods. Although they could use divine arts, they were limited to manipulation, not perfect control. They could guide the effects of the divine arts before fully taking effect, healing pain or causing death. But once the divine arts truly took effect on the recipients, they too lost the ability to control them. Ultimately, these were priests who hadn't even stepped into the legendary domain. In the domain of godhood practitioners, legendary wasn't much further than the demigods among demigods. Kill. Thus, the horses began to trot, gradually accelerating forward. Thousands of knights followed Hector in a wedge formation, launching into a charge. The priests of the gods were right in front of them, and at this moment Hector felt what he was doing was no different from what his grandfather had done. One refused to deliver the dues to deities, while the other was prepared to slaughter the servants of the gods. May the goddess of wisdom protect me. God's servants slaughtering other gods' servants. There was nothing wrong with that. In the next instant, a sharp spear sliced through the throat of a priest. Hector saw the unwillingness and disbelief in the victim's eyes, and he saw many more priests struggling to unleash their divine arts. But once the charge started, the only option for a knight was to press forward. Charge! For Athena! Shouting a rallying cry he himself couldn't quite believe, Hector crossed over the bodies of the slain priests. Thousands of knights headed eastward, directly toward the fortresses of the Alliance. At this moment, the Alliance probably didn't yet know what was happening here, and Hector didn't plan to give them a chance to recover. No wonder. Since ancient times, the mortal realm has never lacked kings and heroes who provoke the gods, because only kings and heroes can come close to godhood, and with proximity comes conflict and grievances. Regardless of whose fault it was initially, when Laomedon insulted the dignity of the gods, perhaps it was already destined what he would do today. As for his own ultimate fate, warriors don't need to think too much, so Hector kept moving forward. Chapter 853, Seeing Destiny. Below the pass, the Alliance swarmed in for the attack. Every moment someone died, and there were panicked deserters who shrank from advancing. However, the dense phalanx ruthlessly blocked their route of retreat with blood, severing their only way out. To die behind or to die beneath the city walls. For the rulers of the nations, these conscripted armies or slaves used as cannon fodder were of no concern. Their sole purpose was to exhaust the enemy's vigor for a fatal blow at the critical moment. How are the preparations on the Trojans' side? Noon has passed. If we delay any longer, even if we successfully break through this pass, it will probably be nighttime. And the battlefield at night. You know what happens. Watching the distant battle, Agamemnon's tall frame had already shed his heavy armor. Next to him, the king of Sparta, Menelaus, held a long spear and shield, the gaps in his leather armor revealing a body scarred. The battlefield at night was an ominous symbol, and of course he was aware of this, because the newly dead souls would wander the earth, trying to make the living join them. Indeed, the priest's divine arts could disperse them, but no one could pay attention to these during the fierce slaughter. Therefore, few in chaos wished to initiate attacks at night, leading to this very reality where mutual destruction was likely. Heh! So he had better be quick. And of course, it doesn't matter if he's a bit late. With a snort, Menelaus waved his arms. Sparta had not sent troops to follow up, but once the Trojans broke through, they would be the one to charge immediately afterward. After all, Spartans never waste their warriors' blood in vain. But since your slaves are willing to die, it wouldn't be bad to stack their corpses into a high wall. There was no explanation about the difference between slaves and conscripted soldiers, for Agamemnon knew to the Spartans indeed there was none. For in order to support their selection of ruthlessly culled offspring, these barbarians conquered a large number of people, making them till the land and transport various necessities for their masters. Servant or slave, it was all the same to the Spartans. Even the city-states that obeyed them, they never spared any pity. Even, from time to time, the Spartans would pick the strongest servant force and then unhesitatingly massacre them. They claim it was to deter the other slaves, but Agamemnon preferred to believe it was to satisfy the barbarians' cruel, murderous souls. Tap tap. Speaking of them, it looks like they're here. With a slight change in expression, Agamemnon and Menelaus immediately turned around. With their strength, the slight trembling of the earth could naturally not escape their senses. Lying at the rear of the alliance, that sound so clearly conveyed the commotion of a knight's charge. Moreover, the faint power of divine arts that followed verified the identity of the arrivals. Thus, the king of Mycenae immediately signaled for the alliance's formation to open up on both sides. In terms of the army, this was a breach. A formation that changes mid-battle without hundreds of training repetitions can hardly adapt easily, especially not the multi-commanded alliance of nations. However, at this moment they were the ones besieging, and the Athenians could not possibly exploit this gap. Agamemnon glanced upwards towards the top of the pass, noting that the garrison there also seemed to be making some maneuvers. Noticed it, have they? Well, Athenian craftsmanship has always been exceptional. Perhaps they have already noted the Trojan knights, but what of it? The alliance already had an overwhelming advantage, even if the deities did not come forth. It was just unknown where, after this battle, the next Athenian defense line would be. Agamemnon? Did you misplace it? What? Puzzled, the king of Mycenae's gaze shifted from the fortress. He looked again towards the rear of the alliance, where the gradually rising dust pointed to a location that did indeed seem a bit off. If things continued this way, the opposition might crash right into the alliance's right flank. And his current position was precisely on the left flank of the Grand Army. Priest, contact the troops on the right, tell them to clear the way, then send a signal to guide the Trojan knights. Without suspicion, Agamemnon's first reaction was not to believe this was a sign of treachery. After all, Priam couldn't possibly make such a choice, for that would only bring his kingdom to collapse. Looks like I've given them too much credit. I thought Hector was a formidable successor, but now it seems he's simply overrated. Shaking his head slightly, Agamemnon seemed disappointed, but now he also had to prepare for the street battle inside the fortress afterward. However, just as he was about to turn around, the king of Mycenae's gaze suddenly froze. For on the spear tip of that leading knight, he seemed to see falling drops of blood. Quick defense! With a loud shout, suddenly, like a pot exploding, the booming voice seemed to overwhelm the slaughter on the battlefield. And almost at the same moment, the fortress gates slowly opened a gap, with Athenian troops poised and ready behind. Like prey caught between two arrows, the bisected alliance troops had nowhere to retreat. And their softest belly was about to be pierced through. Priam, has he gone mad? Incredulous. Yet at that moment, Agamemnon could almost envision the deity's reprimand. Chapter 854. Seeing Destiny _2. He had no time to say anything else. He casually ordered his deputy to stabilize the situation while he headed toward the army on the other side. the royalty of the Trojans only by capturing them could he mitigate some of his culpability. Tat tat, eft. The sound of wind whooshed past his ear, his spear casually flicking aside the obstructive foot soldiers. The strength of thousands was unified, making Hector unstoppable at this moment. For mortals, a cavalry charge was often intermittent. This was not only to build momentum but also because they often exhausted a prepared lance in one attack. After all, in a real charge, the tremendous impact was enough to tear a knight's arm, so they used fragile, easily broken spear shafts to solve this problem. However, this was only the reasoning of mortals. In the mythological era, nothing in the mortal realm could stop these knights. Boom! A loud, intense boom, not a physical collision, yet it stirred the soul. Focused vigor, with Hector as its blade edge, sliced through as smoothly as a hot knife through butter. It was nearly instantaneous. Hastily assembled defensive lines simply collapsed with a boom. Kill! With succinct words, Hector continued forward. 3 formidable warriors tried to slow his pace, but in this moment, none could match him. His spear pierced directly into the central army, tearing almost half of the right flank of the alliance apart in a brief period. And it was not until this moment that Hector finally encountered an enemy worth his attention. Patroclus, a prince from a minor nation, his country not even as well known as he. At this moment, this foreign hero stood before him, seemingly rebuking him for his treachery. However, Hector simply sped up again, aiming directly at this obstacle impeding his progress. Buzz! Hiss! The spear sang, as if to mourn the enemy's death. Under normal circumstances, if facing the enemy in front of the battle lines, even if victorious, Hector might have had to fight for a while. But at this moment, when the sharpness of thousands of knights was concentrated in him, a swift, decisive thrust ended a hero of the nations. Stop! A loud shout, and another figure leapt out from the ranks. Hector swung his spear, but this time, with his momentum dulled, he couldn't kill the opponent again. Clang! A brief clash, and the newcomer was finally repelled. Sitting on his warhorse, which had finally been forced to a stop, Hector loudly asked, "Who are you, and what is your name? In my memory, the Alliance does not have a warrior like you." "I am Prince Ajax of Achaia from Salamis," he answered loudly, the young hero drawing his sword and advancing. "You do not know me simply because I have not yet accomplished a great deed, but that will change after today. Today, I will defeat you here, and henceforth, my name will be celebrated among the nations." Ajax and Hector, who should have met outside Troy City after some time, accidentally encountered each other here as heroes who should have admired each other. And even though the camps rotated initially, in this moment, they finally confronted each other with weapons drawn. Rustle, rustle, steep mountains, endlessly connected. In front of the fortress in the Aigaleo Mountains, the bloody battle showed no sign of abating. But a few dozen miles away from the battlefield, in a mountain gorge, it was as peaceful as ever. The battle in the mountains didn't affect this place. The fountain's water flowed ceaselessly. In such a tranquil environment, Lane was making his way uphill along a trail trodden by animals. The mountain was steep and uninhabited, filled with all sorts of dangers. However, by coincidence, Lane hadn't encountered any fierce beasts or demonic monsters on his journey. It was as if they were no longer here, or had left for some reason. But Lane didn't mind. He simply kept climbing, following the path. As time ticked away and the sun began to set, the woods started to thin. He could vaguely see an open space and a pond up ahead. At that moment, Lane slowed his pace as if he was waiting for something. Ahem. "Excuse me, young man. Please wait a moment." Soon after, an elderly voice suddenly rang out from the woods. Turning around under Lane's gaze, an ugly-faced old woman was climbing the mountain, step by step, with the aid of a cane. It was she who had spoken, and noticing Lane's awareness of her, she unconsciously quickened her pace. At that moment, a smile appeared on Lane's lips. Crack, thud, ouch! It seemed she had stepped on a piece of broken stone, lost her balance, and fell to the ground. Not getting up immediately, she instinctively paused for a moment. The old woman had never expected to trip and fall. Though her body was frail, such a low-probability event should not have happened to her. Struggling to stand, the old woman was about to say something. However, when she looked up again, all she saw was Lane watching her as if watching a play. Silence for a moment. Her anger surged inwardly, yet she suppressed it. The old woman forced a smile as if nothing had happened. Good, very good. She had intended to use beasts, but since she had encountered a human, it was naturally better to use a human. She had planned to reward this fortunate mortal later, but unexpectedly, he dared to demean her dignity. Although he was unaware of her true identity, his actions had already sealed his fate. Putting aside her annoyance for the moment, the old woman smiled and asked, "Young man, what brings you here?" "Waiting for someone." His reply was brief and to the point. Lane no longer looked at her but turned to admire the clouds in the sky. "Waiting is good. I'm also waiting for someone." Pausing after each word, as if unfazed by the coldness, the old woman continued, "Young man, may I know how to address you?" An eye twitched. She couldn't believe she'd meet such a person on her rare descent from the mountain. If it weren't for some matters regarding the water, she wouldn't have tolerated him till now. She took a mental note after a brief contemplation. Ahem. It's indeed rude of me, but young man, why keep people at arm's length? I am Atropos, a seamstress who has been cutting cloth all her life. I have 2 sisters at home. One draws threads and the other weaves. Speaking of which, what do you do, young man? Atropos. Turning his head back to face the old woman's expectant look, Lane pondered for a moment, then replied evenly, "That's quite ordinary. Otherwise, I wouldn't have never heard of it. As for me, I'm a bit better, just a busy, ordinary artisan. I have a few servants at home, some responsible for lighting, some for planting flowers." He didn't hide anything but spoke the truth. After all, there's nothing that cannot be spoken to others. Besides, the answer itself was not problematic. A seamstress who cuts cloth can also duly handle cutting destinies. A sister who draws threads can decide the length of the life of worldly things. Then an ordinary artisan casually crafting the order of the world, and a servant of light illuminating the brightness of a realm. Compared to this, there isn't much difference. Chapter 855 Paris. Sigh, I just knew. At the Agaleo Mountains, beside an unnamed pond, the aged face stiffened once again, and even though she had been prepared, Atropos still found it difficult to accept when she personally never heard of it. Indeed, she had always been aware that in Chaos's mortal realm, the fates were never liked. Whether it was the mortals on earth or the immortal deities, even Zeus, who treated them with respect, still instinctively detested and rejected them. After all, destiny could not be changed, and the 3 fates were even more so. What they brought was never good news, only vicious reports that tormented people day and night. A prophecy, a mortal king committed the tragedy of killing his father and marrying his mother. To evade destiny, 3 generations of divine kings slaughtered each other. Atropos understood this. No one liked unavoidable disasters. Yet, whenever she came to the mortal realm, she still wished to reveal her own name. The goddess of destiny had once promised in her heart that she would reward anyone who could recognize her at a glance. However, regrettably, no one in the world had yet received this honor. Cough, a craftsman. Being able to earn such a household at a young age, you must have worked hard. It seems, I, an old fellow, am indeed useless. Coughs continued, her body ravaged by the backlash of destiny so frail. Atropos had no doubt, although she was a deity, under that dreadful erosion, she probably could not compare to even a stronger mortal. With humble remarks, the goddess of destiny shifted the tone, ready to get to the main topic. However, unexpectedly, Lane by her side seriously took over her lead. In that case, you're not wrong, especially since you seem to be not far from death. Being of such an age and still having to climb up here, it seems that any weaving industry outside Athens really has no future. Before she could speak, Atropos took a deep breath, forcibly calming the rebuke that nearly burst forth. From a mortal's perspective, this human was not wrong. After all, Athena was the goddess of wisdom, and a skilled maiden with bright eyes. Her woven fabrics could even move the stars, and Athenians always focused on the inheritance of weaving. No country could surpass Athens in this regard. Even Atropos admitted that, in terms of skill, even Clotho, who weaves destiny, was far inferior to Athena. Young man, I think you might have a bit misunderstood. Although we indeed only make some fabrics, what my sisters and I weave are not ordinary materials. Speaking solemnly, the goddess of destiny leaned on her cane. At this moment, Atropos's rational mind told herself that she need not debate such matters with a mortal. Life spanned barely a century, born at dawn and dead by dusk, too weak to have any perceivable impact on destiny. The goddess of destiny couldn't see why she needed to care about his opinions. However, for some reason, today Atropos felt unusually competitive. It seemed that no matter what, she did not want to be surpassed by the mortal before her. Our threads are tangible. They change into myriad colors in my sister's hands. Our threads are intangible, and apart from Clotho's skillful hands, no one can grasp their true form. Whether narrow or wide, Lachesis always draws the most perfect shapes. Not lacking an inch or a hair, my hand holding the scissors never wavers. All mortals on earth and gods in heaven, anyone for whom I have woven the end product has never failed to want to see its face, and for this we are revered. Young man, let the sun, moon, and stars bear witness. Every word I have spoken is a veritable truth. So now, do you still think you are somewhat better than me? As Atropos finished speaking, the aged face lifted. Not far from the pond, something in a bush slightly trembled. The awaited person was there. Yet at this moment, the goddess of destiny stared directly into Lane's eyes, without the slightest deviation. This human's appearance was an accident, according to her original plan. She shouldn't be here arguing about such trivial matters. But right now, Atropos wanted to hear this mortal submission and recognition. Even though it was unreasonable, but as a deity of chaos, that was what she had to do. Chaos's deities were just so, if they wanted to do something, then it must be done well. Even though mortal recognition was meaningless to her, it was still the same. It sounds like you have some skill, but even so, it doesn't make any difference. As a craftsman who has worked hard for many years, how could I be surpassed by a weaver? Smilingly speaking, as though taking Atropos's words as boasting. No more rustling came from the distant bushes, and Lane simply pretended not to notice. After all, it would soon be his turn to enter. Rustle, rustle. The breeze rustled, and the sound of the pond was crisp and moving. The fragrance of Mycelia surrounded the tip of his nose, but Paris had no mood to enjoy it. Paris, the second son of the king of Troy, and Hector's brother. He also possessed a globally recognized handsome appearance that could easily captivate others. However, at this moment, hiding in the bushes beside the pond, Paris was exceptionally excited. It might be because of the irregularities of destiny or perhaps some other influence. This mortal, who was supposed to have a major impact on the world, had not gained much fame yet. At least no deity had shown him favor. He should have been chosen by a goddess to decide the ownership of the golden apple. He should have directly faced 3 rewards, choosing among wisdom, power, and beauty. Helen, who with a smile could dissipate the murderous intent of hundreds of thousands, was supposed to be his wife. After Hector's death, he almost had the right to inherit the throne of Troy. However, now Paris had nothing. To keep him away from the dangerous battlefield, they even sent him away from the fortress earlier. This seemed like protection, but it was also a kind of disgrace. No heir to the kingdom would avoid war and death, at least not openly in this era. Angry but powerless to change anything, Paris truly had no real strength. Thus, The annoyed Paris left the camp prepared for him and wandered aimlessly through the mountains. Perhaps by coincidence, when he had awakened from a nap, Paris unexpectedly discovered two extraordinary figures beside him. Both mortals on the ground and gods in the sky, they all desire to see their visages in the fabrics I weave. Every word was so clear, and Paris could not help but peek out from a crevice in the bushes. An ugly, elderly woman and a young man in black clothes with silver ornaments. But whether it was the old woman or the young man, Paris knew that they were probably not ordinary people. In that old woman's demeanor, in Atropus's gaze, he clearly felt a familiar essence. It was an arrogance and disdain, like how aristocrats view the peasants beneath their feet or how a king views his attendants. It's not equal to cruelty or evil, it could be tolerant and benevolent. But such benevolence was definitely not founded on kindness. I never thought that just taking a nap would lead to such an encounter. Who are these people? This man must be some famous demigod hero that I have just not seen before. As for this old one, could she be an evil witch? Silently hiding at the side, in Paris's mind, this was exactly how priests described witches. Arrogant, presumptuously trying to compare with deities in some respects. Or cold and ugly, hiding malice behind a hideous face. Or dirty and reclusive, not bathing for decades and consuming only mud and decay. Sniffing the air, the faint scent of decay and a soul-piercing stench further confirmed this possibility. No wonder she appeared in such a remote place. Indeed, witches are always so malevolent. But regardless of who they are, what does it have to do with me? If only gold would fall from the sky. Carefully hiding, Paris attentively listened. He had heard of this old witch's powers. What about this young man? Even if it was merely mutual flattery, it would serve to pass the time. As for me, since you claim your weaving to be so exceptional, why, as an excellent craftsman, wouldn't my creations be equally superior? The voice traveled from the pond to the bushes. Lane's voice clear and audible. Give eyes to a mud sculpture, and the gods can't distinguish them from living beings. Paint a disk in the sky, and light truly comes to the mortal realm at night. Constructing a house of my own, the world knows to follow suit. Atropus. This is the skill I've honed over many years. Still no lies. Just as the goddess of destiny merely described her own reality, so did Lane. Only when the initial mud sculptures were created did life begin in the world. If he had not painted the disk, there would be no light in the ancient night sky. As for the house he built, to this day, there was only one imitation, something Atropus probably could not discern from destiny. Young man, sometimes it's better to stick to the facts. As Atropus's gaze gradually lost its feigned warmth, she determined that the man in front of her was merely blathering. A joke, not to mention the extraordinary skill described. Even if he was just a well-known craftsman known throughout a kingdom, he wouldn't be so obscure in destiny. Respecting elders is sometimes not a bad thing. Glancing past the bushes, Atropus slowly said, "Speaking more humbly might spare you some needless trouble." Chapter 8:56. Scissors. Hurry. Hurry up and fight. It's great if one dies. Even better if both perish. If all of you die, then I'll see if your lives truly match the achievements you boast about. Only the shape of the mouth changed without making any sound. Wide-eyed. At that moment, Paris was both scared and a little excited in the bushes. Like that old witch, that young man was also no ordinary fellow, which made it interesting. As for whether they could really start a fight, Paris remarked that he was just thinking idly. It was like fantasizing that an ordinary life suddenly gets interrupted with someone telling him he's actually the offspring of the divine king living in the mortal realm, destined to become a legendary hero. The chance of success was nearly non-existent, but that didn't stop people from imagining. So, subconsciously, he smiled. The anticipation of the future was always beautiful. However, the next moment, the Prince of Troy suddenly realized that his surroundings seemed to have changed. Exclamation point. Shocked, the sunlight shone on Paris, yet it couldn't warm his body. The bush in front of the prince disappeared at some unknown time, and he was exposed in front of the two beside the pond. Suddenly aware, Paris slowly lifted his head. Looking at those two beings staring at him, the prince tried hard to muster a smile. Hee, no need to be nervous, handsome young man. I'm no big shot, and there's no rule forbidding anyone from being with me. Chuckling, her aged face seemed even fiercer. Atropos seemed not to notice Paris's subconscious aversion, continuing to ask with a smile, I don't know. Regarding my proposal just now, what do you think? What? Stunned, Paris felt a bit confused because he hadn't been listening to what they were saying. Leaning on her cane, witnessing this scene, the goddess of fate paused her breath, then reluctantly swallowed it down. Huff! This was a mortal even favored by fate, yet still so ignorant. But fate would never eternally favor any being, mortals even less so. Thinking of this, Atropos regained some composure. She squeezed out a smile again, repeating what she had said before. As you can see, on some matters, this young man and I have some disagreements. We both believe our abilities are extraordinary, yet we cannot convince the other. It's a difficult conundrum, but luckily, at that moment, we found you nearby. Nothing is fairer than the judgment of a stranger. After all, you're not acquainted with either of us. So we decided to entrust you with the right to judge which is superior. What do you think? Of course, my name is Paris. Regarding this matter, I think I could certainly give it a try. His expression shifted from nervous to calm, then from calm to a desire hidden. Whether it was Lane or Atropos, both saw the seemingly ambiguous yet clearly evident thoughts in Paris's mind, but neither exposed them. They merely watched quietly as the handsome prince pretended to hesitate for a long while, then presented his request. Both of you, if it's the heavens that let me meet you today and make such a judgment, naturally, I have no reason to refuse. But before that, perhaps I should witness both of your real abilities. This would help me make the right decision. I have no objections. Nodding with a smile, soon after, Lane also heard Atropos agree as well. However, the goddess of fate stated that not everyone was qualified to witness her creations. In response, Lane went along with it. Then Paris, please come with me. With a hoarse voice, Atropos gestured. Although there were some minor interruptions in the process, the result wasn't much different. She had originally come for Paris. After all, the trajectory of fate's deviation was increasingly severe. Previously, the goddess of fate hadn't intended to intervene personally. She had planned to use this young man she encountered by chance as a tool, luring him with her prophetic guise to make a choice, teaching him the secret of prophecy. Of course, it wasn't true prophecy, because Atropos would present the destiny she wished to see through this mysticism to the spellcaster, and since she was the goddess of fate, few could uncover the deception within. In doing so, guiding the young man through desire and profit to steer the future king of Troy down the right path would allow her an opportunity to retreat. The wealth and glory he enjoyed through the process were his rewards, and as for the cost, naturally it was to meet the destined death when fate required it. Atropos found this reasonable, exchanging life for decades of prosperity, a choice many mortals would willingly make. However, the attitude of this mortal eventually enraged her, prompting the goddess to choose another path. Come on, come over. Paris, I think you must be curious as to why our sister's weavings are unparalleled in this world. The shadow of the canopy cast on her body made it seem even more obscure and daunting. Atropos reached out her hand, taking black scissors from her bosom. Because they cannot only be worn, but also foretell a person's future achievements. Come over. Let me show you the glory that should belong to you in the future. Swallowing nervously, looking at the scene before him, Paris felt as if he was about to be sacrificed. Chapter 857 Scissors_2. After hesitating for a long time, the prince chose to approach, glancing back at the distant, faint outline of Lane. It was said that wizards mastered all kinds of evil witchcraft, but their bodies were incredibly fragile. Although Paris didn't know if this fragility was truly that weak, or if it merely seemed weak compared to those demigod heroes. But the witch before his eyes didn't look robust no matter how you saw her. As a direct descendant of a god, even if weak, Paris had his own skills. Besides, who wouldn't be interested in his future achievements? Tap, tap. A long while later, by the water's edge, with a conflicted heart, Paris arrived at the blue stone where Lane sat. The young prince didn't hide his hesitation, even though he could feel the burning gaze on his back. Investing in a king. It sounded reasonable enough, but he was still a bit apprehensive. He had only intended to gain some benefits, but Paris never imagined he would be entangled in this himself. Would he accept it? The prince thought about it but was subconsciously resistant. Even the fates, who knew everything about Paris from his birth to all his unknown futures, didn't notice. They had made a serious mistake or subconsciously forgotten something. That, as a handsome man, a lover of beauty more than power and wisdom, Paris was genuinely a face enthusiast. Certain things Lachesis could do, Clotho could do, but as the eldest of the fates, when Atropos did it herself, it invariably added plenty of trouble. For while the throne was enticing and the legendary beauty equally so, when these were spoken by an ugly old woman, no matter how vivid the visions of the future were, Paris remained skeptical. "Mr. Paris, you seem confused." Splash. A pebble fell into the pool, creating a small splash. Lane's words interrupted Paris's thoughts, awakening him from his dilemma, and the prince pondered briefly. He touched the cold scissors that had appeared in his arms, recalling the rumors of the witch, and Paris finally nodded slowly. "Yes, from that lady, I learned some things, but I'm unsure if I should really believe them since she doesn't seem very kind." "Then, Mr. Avon, what is your creation? Compared to her, I'm quite looking forward to your result." "My result? It depends on what you want." Smiling, Lane asked with a grin, "Do you desire the kingdom's power, extraordinary wisdom, or captivating beauty that enchants all?" Exclamation point. Raising his head suddenly, Paris hadn't expected to hear such a response. Earlier, on the miraculous thread, the prince seemed to see his past. And when they were woven into fabric, the prince seemed to see his future. He saw himself win the favor of beauties, enjoying the joys and pleasures of the mortal realm. You know, it's clear that compared to that lady's weaving skills, mine are somewhat superior. Perhaps this is precisely why she wanted you to kill me, to fill the ugly jealousy in her heart." Splash. Without looking back, Lane threw another pebble into the pool and pointed to the pool in front of him. "This is part of my creation. Cut the fabric she gave you and throw it into the pool. Maybe you can see what she didn't tell you." The three deities of Mount Nyssa, Clotho made the thread, Lachesis measured its length, but the ultimate result came from Atropos's shears cutting destiny. So since the fates didn't want to show Paris his originally destined end, they didn't use her scissors to cut it. But Lane didn't want them to conceal it, so he gave the prince an opportunity to see. As to why, despite walking among mortals with human nature, he was still involved in these deities' affairs. At the end of this epoch, these three fates shouldn't remain in the mortal world. And this pair of scissors must be held in advance. Throwing the third pebble into the pool, through a seam in Paris's clothing, Lane could faintly see the dark scissor shape. He would meet each of the three fates one by one. But due to the unique authority of fate, he couldn't let his avatar decisively use strength to judge them. Just like today, even with Atropos seemingly so frail, Lane equally knew that as long as Chaos's destined fate still existed in the world, nothing apart from fate itself could truly harm her. Even the other two fates and their divine artifacts meant nothing to her in reality. Fortunately, besides this, what could wound a fate were themselves. Perhaps this was a form of alternative balance. Chapter 858. Equivalent Price. Where his tentacles touched, the shear's handle was cold and hard. He glanced back, and even though he saw nothing, the young prince still seemed to perceive Atropos's hidden disdainful and arrogant gaze. So be it, since it was a gift from another, he had the right to deal with it. As for the future recorded therein, Paris believed he would definitely not forget. Rather than bury his doubts, it was better to see for himself. Ha! With a light exhale, the prince drew the dark shears from his clothes. Without any anomalies or decorations, Paris grasped the divine artifact capable of severing destiny, then retrieved the cloth that reflected his future. Clip, with a snip, as the cloth scattered into threads and the threads dipped into the water, the prince reached out to touch the water's surface. In the next moment, he was swallowed by the surging pool. Wait! Paris, what have you done? Almost simultaneously, a shrill shout came from afar. The moment the shears touched the threads, Atropos had realized what was happening. Heart-wrenching pain surged, and as a goddess of destiny, she should not have shown him the future. But to correct the deviating path, Atropos had to make concessions. Even so, her ultimate goal was to bring everything back on track, not to lead it further astray. But if Paris knew everything, would he still follow the path she had arranged? Whoosh! No! The prince disappeared into the water, and the distraught Fates watched from afar where he had vanished. At this moment, despite her reluctance, Atropos had to face reality. Besides, there was him. With stiff movements, she raised her head, her aged face mixed with anger and astonishment. Was this a trap, and who dared to scheme against destiny? Apart from the three goddesses from Mount Nyssa, who else could interfere with the power of destiny? Who are you, and what is your relation to Mother Night? No matter whose instructions you follow, I hope you understand, those who attempt to twist destiny will inevitably suffer its retribution. Even the triumvirate of eternal night cannot alter the laws of fate. Atropos struck the ground fiercely with her cane, still trying to salvage the situation. However, sitting on a stone by the water, Lane just shook his head. Just revealing what you hid? Are you so anxious? Since we've already taken different paths, why not accept their divergences? Turning slightly, facing the unsightly Fates, Lane extended his first and last invitation to her. Let go of your guardianship over destiny. As a goddess of destiny, you are but an agent of chaos's fate. You were never destiny, and destiny has never truly entrusted itself to you. How different are you to him, from Paris to you? Change the script, change the path. Perhaps there lies another way out. Try to influence him with the power you hold, starting with Paris. If you are willing, let everything under heaven and earth bear witness. The backlash of destiny against you, I can take upon myself. It was not a lie, nor a deceit. For Atropos, Lane had no need to deceive. If she chose to believe, then Lane was truly willing to bear the curse that destiny would impose on her with his mortal body. Even this had been prepared long ago, from the time Mount Sinai rose, from when he named his palace such a title. Lane knew that he would inevitably have some destiny with the goddess of destiny. He reached out his hand, unbothered by her wrinkled, foul-smelling body. All because of the backlash of destiny, it could also be nullified by its removal. However, facing the hand extended by Lane, Atropos lifted her cane disgustedly and struck it hard. Snap! Enough! What are you to dare change the course of destiny? From beginning to end, the order of all things stems from this. No one can change him, no exceptions. Without any trust, the goddess of destiny wouldn't believe someone could bear the backlash of destiny for her. She felt that Lane was mocking her, trying to ridicule her appearance of hope turning to disappointment. In the river of countless destinies, Atropos had seen similar things more than once. Thus, she unhesitatingly brushed away Lane's hand and then turned to leave. This time she had made a mistake, but it was only because she hadn't known someone would dare to interfere with destiny. However, even an outer god like the Mother Tree still needed to manifest her might in the mortal realm through the fated Typhon. Apart from that unknowable source that caused chaos in chaos's fate, anyone who opposed him would only receive punishment equivalent to his Startled at that moment, Atropos realized something she had not understood until now. the lessons of the past divine kings clearly before her, what kind of person would still dare to trouble her? However, at that moment the goddess of destiny suddenly remembered. There seemed indeed to be something in this world that could achieve this, and it had always been doing so until today. He was a black hole on the net of destiny, devouring all the light that approached. He was also a whirlpool in the river of destiny, continuously consuming the flow. All the changes of fate up to this day had their source in chaos. Although the fates had always been patching up destiny, what they truly wanted to do was also to find this source. No, you are. His eyes widened, speaking subconsciously. At this moment, Atropos was extremely excited. Regarding the source that disturbed everything, the three fates had different views. Yet, as the eldest among them, Atropos had only one goal. That was to find him, and then, using herself as a vessel, bear the true might of fate without limit. As a fate, when destiny itself was under a great threat, Atropos could do this. And in the face of this supreme power, no matter how deep the loopholes were, they would be completely filled. To maintain destiny, to become the tool for the manifestation of its power at a critical moment, this was the true value of the fate's existence. After all, destiny itself does not kill anyone, but the hand of destiny can. Just as the laws of this world do not directly strike any gods, but the divine king can. I've found you. Joy surged in her heart. If she had truly found the source of everything, maybe she could finally find relief. With thoughts flashing like lightning, Atropos excitedly took a step forward. However, before she could do anything, accompanied by a long sigh, that old and ugly face completely froze in place. A nameless pond shimmered slightly, reflecting the presence of Paris in a shadow within. The black scissors emanated waves that could sever destiny. The threads provided by Atropos spiraled and danced in the reflection, showing another fate identical to her. But her expression was somewhat stiff, and anyone could easily notice the problem. People could detect the problem, but rules could not. Thus, some force merely flashed, restoring everything to normal due to the unharmed condition of the fate. Rising from the blue stone, Lane withdrew the hand he had extended, feeling somewhat amused. For the first time, a god was directly struck in their divine body, the opponent being a fate who might not even beat a mortal, and the weapon a mundane staff. It's unfortunate, Atropos, that you still refused my kindness. Since that is so, then I must resort to the most troublesome method. Stepping forward slowly, Lane moved to a position one step in front of the fate. He knew what Atropos had wanted to do, and this was exactly why he had to deal with the fate. Be it the divine king or the fates, to some extent, they could both become vessels for some truly powerful forces in moments of crisis. And because of this, Lane needed all kinds of remedies targeting them. While there were destined, next-generation divine kings to address the divine king, there were no order-designated next-generation fates. So unable to use his own rules to combat, he had to step in himself. You will regret this. Even if you imprison me, I still have a sister, and you, imprisoning destiny, will also face backlash. A vague thought drifted from her still body. Atropos seemed to gradually regain her ability to move. Regardless, as a fate, although she had almost no power to influence others also found it difficult to affect her. Lane's trickery was only temporary. Only her own power could truly seal herself. Moreover, Lane knew even if she did so, he would still have to pay an equivalent price. Such was destiny, a power that always made him cautious and wary. Even Lane at times wondered whether he had changed destiny itself or merely sided with it, helping it crush what belonged to this world's domain, that trajectory which was inevitably unchangeable. But regardless, since he had done so, Lane was already prepared for everything. The sound of splashing water. Wizard, die! As the sound of water splashing rang out, Paris leapt out of the pond. It was unknown what he had seen, but the young prince angrily aimed the black scissors at their original owner. This was the divine artifact that Atropos had personally handed to Pallas. Yet now, just like the Thanatos once bound by its own chains, when the scissors became corporeal, the still struggling fate instantly turned motionless. All that was left were those eyes filled with resentment and curses, still staring at Lane. I know what you're thinking. I guided Pallas to kill you, so one day, I will be killed too. Of course, I could try to delay it, even indefinitely postpone its arrival. But rest assured, I definitely don't plan on doing so. Reaching out to close Atropus's eyes, he failed. So, with a low chuckle, Lane then gouged out the eyes of the fate. In some ways, destiny was indeed fair. Atropus attempted to use Pallas to achieve her purpose, so she also faltered because of it. She struck Lane's arm with a staff, so she would forever lose her eyes. From now on, the title of blind which truly fit, as their ancestor was indistinguishable from them. Mr. Paris, it looks like you've gained quite a bit. Blood flowed from Atropus's eye sockets and heart, but Lane no longer cared about her. Of the three fates, the first was thus concluded. Now only Paris remained. Chapter 859 Greed and the Wand. In the tranquil mountain forest, by the placid waters of the pond. Clutching the black shears, he plunged them into the body of the old crone, who stood like a frozen sculpture. The young prince seemed to be venting his fear and anger. However, when the peak of his emotions had passed and he looked at the dark gold blood seeping from the ancient deity's body, Paris's reason gradually returned to him. The golden blood, that was the color of divine blood, born of the divine king's lineage, confirming this result. Offspring of a deity or a deity itself. The reason it couldn't be confirmed was the gray matter mixed into the blood. The prince didn't know what kind of backlash fate held, but his instincts told him this was nothing good. Mr. Paris, it seems that what you saw in the pond was not very pleasant. But you needn't worry, whatever you saw was just one possible direction for the future. Just as you now walk a completely different path. War and death no longer accompany you. Seeing the prince's bewilderment, Lane offered a consoling smile. No matter what, Paris had done him a favor today, and he shouldn't leave empty-handed. Perhaps he could offer him an escape, to avoid the war that was going to engulf the world. However, just as Lane was about to continue speaking, the prince suddenly lifted his head. After a glance at the black shears, Paris's gaze slowly rose. As their eyes met in midair, Lane didn't see fear in the prince's eyes, only desire and struggle. Your Highness, she's dead now, so those things she showed me probably won't come true, right? Paris spoke slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. That's correct. At least you can see it that way for yourself. Atropus won't come for you anymore. And as for those things she showed you, they were never going to come true. Lane nodded slightly in agreement. Is that so? The prince's eyes flickered, his hand subconsciously brushing over the black shears. The dark golden blood flowing over them made this seemingly ordinary tool mysterious and dangerous. Yet feeling its cold touch, Paris's heart grew fervent. So, Your Highness, it seems you've gotten what you wanted, killed your enemy. Though it's not exactly what we agreed on, but I did indeed provide some help, right? That's also true. So if there's something you want to know, I'd be happy to enlighten you. If there's something you desire, I can also try to fulfill it for you. Frowning slightly, Lane nodded again. And at that moment, he realized the prince's intentions. One's nature is hard to change. Perhaps some things are destined to happen, even without the influence of fate. Even though he had guessed, Lane still asked one last question. So Paris, what is it that you want? Power? Wealth or life? Whatever you choose, I can satisfy you. No, I want none of that. The prince spoke with conviction. I desire them all, but I have experienced them all. Power. I was born a prince. Wealth. I have never lacked. As for life, I'm not yet old, so why should I worry about youth? So if I must choose the one thing I want the most, my answer is singular. Deliberate in his words, Paris finally uttered the name that haunted him in the illusion before Lane. Helen. I want Helen. I only want her. I am her true love, and she is my only one. And having witnessed the hardships of the future, we will definitely not repeat the same mistakes. If you want to find her, Why come to me? You should know where she is and how to bring her back. After a moment of silence, Lane looked at Paris as if staring at a raft willingly heading towards the abyss. Yet standing by the unnamed pond, the prince was completely unaware. Of course, I know where she is. I will never forget her place, although it was just a meeting in an illusion. But this time it's different. This time I won't sneak her away. I will openly take her from home. And this time, even without Anon's healing potion, I could live until the end of my life. Anon, the river god Cobran's daughter, was Paris's true wife and the only one in the prophecy who could save him from the grasp of death. Originally, in his fated path, the prince had abandoned her for Helen. And ultimately, with a wound from an arrow and no cure to be found, he had to face death in despair. This time, although circumstances had changed, Paris harbored the same thoughts. You want this pair of shears, right? But they were given to me personally by that witch. Although I do not know the true use of it, I understand that without the user's permission, others shouldn't be able to utilize this special tool. Since you claim to possess greater skill than her, then demonstrate it, enabling me to withstand a hero's arrows, enabling me to take Helen away from Sparta. One item for another, the shears for you, strength for me, that is my only request. Even though he knew the man before him might not be of good nature, and he might harbor resentment for his request. Chapter 860 Greed and the Wand _2. But just as the myths record Paris daring to forsake Hera and Athena, choosing the obviously weaker Aphrodite, it is enough to see that he is a qualified chaos hero. To stake his life in a moment of pride, to attack a kingdom for the sake of beauty, or even to flaunt his own abilities by challenging the gods, only to ultimately be subdued by divine punishment and curses. The Prince of Troy was just such a being, and he saw nothing wrong with it. All right, if that's your request, then I agree to it. Today's business ends here. You will get what you desire. Nodding slowly, since Paris sought such a power, Lane would give it to him. Reaching out, Lane broke off a branch from the nearest tree, stripping it until only a stick with 7 knots remained. Applying slight pressure, the stick pierced his finger, and the blood dyed the stick crimson. Lane then inserted it into Atropus's bleeding wound, like 2 attracting magnets, mixing the dark gold blood with the stick, the blood of a human and the blood of a god. Destiny intertwining with destiny. Paris got his reward by stabbing Death, the fate, and his compensation came from this. Time ticked away second by second, until the color drained from her face. Atropus's wound no longer dripped dark golden fluid, and the nearly 2-palm-long stick had significantly changed in appearance. The 7 natural segments of the wood were aligned as regularly as the phalange of a finger. Fine lines ran along the grain of the wood, like veins and skin. Exhaling deeply, Lane handed it to the young prince, who received it with a face full of puzzlement. What is this? This is what you asked for. The power that can fulfill your wish. Lane spoke calmly. Power? Why don't I feel it? Frowning, Paris was somewhat disappointed. Could a blood-stained stick really help him bring back Helen? Holding the base of the stick, the young prince was momentarily unsure what to do. There was no special sensation, just an ordinary branch that seemed easily breakable. However, just as Paris was about to question further, he suddenly had a strange intuition. Raising the stick above his head, he pointed the tip towards the sky. In the next moment, right before the prince's eyes, the clouds above the entire mountain began to rotate. Bit by bit, they formed a vast vortex. In just a short time, the sky had darkened. This is. Without knowing the principle, not understanding how he had done it, it seemed like he merely wanted it this way and everything was achieved. The prince looked at the smith beside him with surprise, but by now, Lane was no longer looking at him. This is what you wanted. You thought she was a witch, so she can also be. You do not understand what witchcraft is, so you still don't understand. But it doesn't matter because as the key and core of this event, it originated from you and rightly belongs to you. You may think of it as the reward you got after conquering destiny. Conquered destiny? His expression stunned, but Paris quickly accepted this fact. Yes, that's right. There was no issue. After all, he had seen the future and changed it himself. This was his declaration of triumph over destiny, and the turning point of his life. With an excited expression, Paris gestured downward, making the leaves in the entire mountain dance in the wind. However, just as the prince was excitedly trying out his new toy, Lane's voice inappropriately rang out. "Your Highness, are you satisfied with it?" "Of course, I couldn't be more satisfied." Paris quickly nodded, as if afraid Lane might take it back. Even if Lane reached out to take it back now, the prince probably would not agree. Seeing this scene, Lane simply continued, "I'm glad you're satisfied, but at the end of everything, I have one last piece of advice for you. You've defeated others with someone else's weapon and achieved victory in this way, ultimately receiving this gift from destiny. However, mystery always submits to a higher mystery. The power obtained in this way will also submit to a stronger force. If you want to possess it forever, just remember not to let the same thing happen to you. Otherwise, Atropos today will be your tomorrow." Ha ha ha. I see. Thank you for your advice. Speaking of which, since the finished product has appeared in this world, how about you, sir? Give your masterpiece a name. Not knowing whether he had listened, Paris laughed out loud, then immediately invited. Watching this scene, a distant memory suddenly surged into Lane's heart. Although there was only one person in front of him, he was not Thanatos at this moment. Yet this scene still made Lane feel as if in another life. It can be a wizard's tool for casting spells. Perhaps it will give rise to imitations. Let's call it the wand. As for its unique appellation, since it is the earliest born of its kind in the world, calling it the Elder Wand seems appropriate. As he spoke, his spirituality slightly stirred. At that moment, Lane felt his human side stabilize a bit. The Elder Wand. He wondered what surprises the other two fates far away on Mount Nyssa had for him. The northern lands of the continent, miles of frost. As the sanctuary of the three fates, Mount Nyssa was a place forbidden to all spirits. It might be life's instinct fearing, or perhaps the fates simply preferred seclusion. So much so that not a single living being could be seen across the thousands of miles of mountain ranges. Clotho was busy spinning threads for all beings, and Lachesis was measuring their lengths. Without interaction, no one dared to disturb, and the two goddesses were each completing their work on opposite sides of Mount Nyssa. Such days had passed for who knows how long, but that day, while diligently spinning thread, Clotho suddenly felt a palpitation. Ah! An unguarded moment caused the white spindle to pierce her finger, and pale golden blood stained the loom red. But she could not be bothered with her finger. Her slender finger casually wiped away the bloodstain, and Clotho immediately mobilized her own power. A goddess of fate would not be injured without reason. Such an improbable accident could never happen to them. It was a warning from the beyond, one that could avert disaster. But after searching for a while, Clotho still found nothing. Sister. Yes, and my sister. I wonder if she has noticed anything. Stepping out the door, Clotho immediately soared into the air. The palpitation was merely a moment, but since then, she had had a bad premonition. Chapter 861 Backlash. Thud. Pushing the wooden door with force, her inexperienced face belied a hint of panic. The goddess, still girl-like in appearance, jogged into the modest wooden hut, where green plants trailed across the walls. Nature and man-made melded together here in what was her sister Lachesis's abode. Unlike the aged wisdom of Atropos or the youthful naivety of Clotho, just like the authority wielded by Lachesis, the god who determined the length of life, she was neither the beginning nor the end. Thus, Lachesis's life was forever at its most mature and prime. She was vivacious and lazy, wise and foolish, and this foreordained that she would never enjoy solitude. As a result, aside from her duties, this goddess rarely stayed atop Mount Nyssa. She was the only one among the fates who had dealings with the all-gods, so much so that some deities even believed there was only one mistress of destiny here. This was another way she differed from her sisters. As fates, Lachesis, and her sisters could peer through some of destiny's veils, so most of the mortal world's beauty and darkness were starkly revealed before them. The holy and the fallen, the loyal and the wantonly free. This was why Clotho so rejected the world below the mountain, while Atropos viewed all living beings as marionettes to be manipulated only as needed. Only Lachesis was different from the two. She mocked the light and dark of gods and men alike while deftly managing her dealings with them. That's why she spent so little time on Mount Nyssa and instead in places of her own choosing. But today was different because the war in the mortal realm had just begun, and whenever this happened, Lachesis was inevitably at work. It wasn't that she couldn't have finished her work in advance. In fact, all the tasks of a fate should have been completed beforehand. However, everything hinged on the premise that all of creation lay under the order of destiny, with everything predetermined and orderly. Yet recently, the wars in the mortal realm had strayed far from their destined path, leading both gods and men in different, unintended directions. People who shouldn't have died did, and those who should have perished lived on. Because of this, Atropos had once more ventured into the mortal realm in an attempt to mend things, while the other two goddesses stayed behind, striving to straighten the twisted knots of fate.
Top?
Sister, are you there? Calling softly, Clotho entered the hut. There were no decorations or anything needless, just a simple wooden home. Releasing a sliver of her power, the girl tried to capture her sister's attention. When Lachesis was working, she might not be able to notice her, so Clotho had always done this. No matter how busy she was, the other always responded. But this time was different from all the others. The more the girl's foreboding feeling grew stronger, the less she heard that familiar voice. Sister, if you don't respond to me, I'm going to come in. Biting her lip lightly, Clotho called out loudly. At the same time, the special power of the fates surged more intensely within her. This should have been enough to draw attention, no matter how engrossed she might be. But a moment passed, then two, then three. The spacious wooden hut was completely still, with only the sound of the wind and rustling leaves echoing repeatedly in the air. Creak. Gritting her fists, seeing that there was still no response, Clotho no longer cared whether she might disturb Lachesis's work. Driven by unease, the girl pushed open the interior door. The simple furnishings were as ever, the house devoid of anything extra. But as soon as she stepped over the threshold, just one glance left Clotho frozen on the spot. Sister, what's happened to you? With a cry of alarm, Clotho ran forward. What lay before her eyes at that moment was her second sister, Lachesis, sprawled on the ground. The staff that measured destiny had fallen, and threads of fate, which Clotho herself had delivered, were scattered around. But what the girl found hardest to accept was Lachesis's current state. Unknown when it had happened, a few strands of silver now mingled in the once beautiful and ample hair of the fate, and on that exposed skin meant to be smooth as water, fine lines had begun to appear. This was a change that should never occur, as a deity's truest appearance was often influenced only by the changes in their authority and spirit. And as a fate, Lachesis was even less exempt. But facts spoke louder than words, and the scene before her seemed to confirm Clotho's suspicions. Sister, you Bang! Bending down to approach, the bright-eyed goddess was full of disarray. She wanted to help her fallen sister to her feet, but the moment she touched Lachesis's arm, Clotho instinctively recoiled as if it was a red-hot iron. The body of the fate collapsed to the ground once more, but by then Clotho was beyond caring about that. The girl looked at her palm in terror, where wisp after wisp of grayish-black mist surged. Divine power stirred, and immense strength coursed over her hand, but all of it seemed to have no effect on that wisp of mist. Visibly, Clotho's once delicate fingers began to change bit by bit. It was as if in an instant they had aged 10 years. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the ground and grasped Clotho's wrist firmly. The frightened girl nearly screamed instinctively, but the next moment, A voice both familiar and alien reached her ears. Clotho, don't be afraid. You should know what this is. It should have come a long time ago. Sister. Looking toward the direction of the voice, Clotho was overjoyed to find her sister had come to. Perhaps it was due to the recent commotion, or perhaps it was simply time. Lachesis grasped Clotho's wrist, and this time, the girl saw no trace of gray. Sister, how did you? Clotho listened to me, tiredly shaking her head. The body that was once full of vitality now seemed so sluggish. Lachesis did not rush to speak. She merely took a moment to gather her spirits, then brought the wrist she held up to her front. Bending forward slightly, she placed her sister's fingers on her forehead. The next moment, as a surge of gray mist flowed, the girl's fingers were restored to normal. Only this time, Clotho clearly saw that another line had formed at the corner of her sister's eyes. This is... First stunned, then as if something dawned on her, she instinctively wanted to back away, but then she stopped herself. And leaning against the ground, Lachesis struggled to lift her body, then managed a weak smile. Clotho, as you see, this is the backlash of destiny. Yes, in the heavens and the earth, past and future, nothing could harm the deputies of destiny, unless that force came from the world itself, or it was the power of destiny. And what now appeared on Lachesis, the two of them had heard of long before. The backlash of destiny was not unfamiliar to them. Even at their birth, they had already come into contact with this backlash, more or less. C3 to 161. Atropos, who was born first, bore the brunt of it, and the birth of the fruit of one day only intensified this process. Thus, her body decayed and withered, her visage aged and lifeless. Clean clothes on her would become filthy, and the wreaths the goddesses loved to wear would wilt because of her. Foul sweat mixed with an inexplicable smell lingered around her, and the mental oppression and malice were unbearable. No one liked this, but Atropos, who was born first, naturally bore the brunt of the malice. By comparison, Lachesis only took on a little of the edge, and at that time she hardly noticed it. As for Clotho, she was not disturbed at all. This was the punishment destiny dealt to its own deputies, although before those order-defying consequences occurred, they had not yet come into the world. However, it seemed destiny would accept no appeals, and the three goddesses were powerless to do anything about it. Therefore, from that day on, Atropos, who bore the most backlash, simply took all that emerged subsequently upon herself. After all, her state could not possibly get any worse. Thus, Lachesis and Clotho were relieved. Especially as the youngest sister, Clotho had never experienced the taste of destiny's backlash. She conscientiously fulfilled her duties as a deity, without having to touch the power that frightens deities. However, it all ended today, with Lachesis, who was in the midst of fulfilling her obligations, reordering the distorted threads of destiny. But at that moment, the backlash of destiny descended from the skies, heedless of time and distance. Clotho, this is what it feels like to be struck by destiny's backlash. I haven't experienced it for a long time, so I fainted for a moment. But it's all right. It won't happen again. And the part that belongs to you, let me take it first. Shaking as she got up from the ground, Lachesis took a deep breath. The next moment, the divine artifact for measuring destiny was in her hand, and visibly, the goddess's exterior began to recover. In just a moment, Clotho saw her familiar sister once again. Her hoarse voice restored as well. Everything seemed no different from before, but Clotho knew it was just the backlash being suppressed within the body. The backlash of destiny was happening every moment. Atropos's condition was the result of 3 epochs' accumulation. And clearly, Lachesis was also now taking on this force of backlash, but just this much was still far from enough to harm her. Sister, you? With a complex gaze, watching what was unfolding, Clotho knew that her sister would surely do this. Because if the backlash of destiny befell her, the Weaver, the consequences would be far more dangerous than for her, the Measurer. Of course, compared to the Measurer, the Cutter only needed to end a segment of destiny, so the impact of the backlash on her would naturally be safer. Still, despite this, Clotho felt a certain heaviness. Addressing the issue of destiny was absolutely urgent. "Sister, so is there a problem with our eldest sister?" she asked, no longer needing to state the purpose of her visit. Obviously, the reason for her premonition lay before her, and facing her sister's query, Lachesis shook her head again. "I don't know, but I'm certain her presence is still there, and she could not possibly be hurt. The only explanation is that Atropos has been imprisoned somewhere that can isolate destiny, or her will has been influenced by something, and she voluntarily gave up on taking the backlash. However, whichever it is, Clotho, I must resolve it. If one of the fates is absent, the deviation of destiny will likely become even more uncontrollable. Not long ago, she received what was so-called an invitation from Mount of the Gods, asking her to celebrate a great trouble solved by the divine court, which Lachesis had declined due to her busy work. After all, only she knew how much trouble the so-called trouble of the divine court had caused the fates, and she did not want to meet that Lord of Darkness. The Moirai still did not know who the manipulator of destiny behind the scenes was, but it must be one of the primordial gods who was beyond their vision. Before identifying the enemy, they had no wish to meet with them. "Clotho, stay here and wait for me to return." Holding the staff, feeling the backlash increasing every moment, Lachesis said firmly. "Once I bring her back, we might not have to worry about the backlash anymore. Because my intuition tells me, this time, we might have found the source of the turmoil in destiny." Chapter 862 Divine Eagle. Under the shroud of destiny, the affairs of Mount Nissa were still unknown to anyone. The continuous mountain ranges stood tall in the northern lands, and the comings and goings of the goddess were a mystery. However, thousands of miles away, even without seeing with his own eyes, Lane could roughly guess the choices made by those two goddesses. After all, contrary to what Lachesis thought, her elder sister was not powerless to bear the backlash of destiny due to her current state. The power of destiny was formless and intangible, yet it could still act upon Atropos. It was only when she realized the situation she faced that the goddess actively gave up this burden. For having fallen into a trap, what she needed to do was not to escape, but to transmit the signal of danger. On this account, it was clear that Atropos had succeeded. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Compared to me seeking her out, it's more fitting for her to come to me. By the pond in the Agaleo Mountains, Paris, who had obtained a treasure, summoned a violent wind and clouds with his wand and lifted himself away. He couldn't wait to see Helen again, and this time, he would conquer her with his handsome appearance and his attentive personality. Paris had even forgotten the father who had arranged for him to take refuge, and his brother who was likely still fighting with the enemy. At that moment, the prince's heart held only one image, just as another path of his had led Troy to destruction. After seeing the prince off, Lane returned to the main peak where the mountain fortress was located. If Paris was adamant, he naturally wouldn't persuade him any further. If the prince wished to shine and heat up a bit more, then so be it, fulfill his wish. After all, Lane didn't know whether the other two fates were aware of the purpose of Atropos's descent from the mountain. If they knew, then Paris' presence would serve as perfect bait.
Tata.
"You're back. Did things go well?" As he stepped into the central hall of the fortress, he was greeted by Andrea's voice, still tinged with a hint of heroic spirit. Looking up at Andrea, who had already taken off her armor, Lane knew that this premeditated inside-and-out collaboration had likely come to a successful conclusion. Let's say it went smoothly, dealing with some troubles ahead of time. At least you shouldn't have to worry about our new allies siding with Athens over some inexplicable reasons, or destroying themselves. For a considerable time in the future, the Trojans may become a solid support for Athens, especially after certain news gets back. Paris was seeking Helen, whose legend was celebrated in later times. But most people only knew of her beauty and the Trojan horse and the great fire, and not many remembered her true origin. Helen, the daughter of the previous king of Sparta, was, in truth, the offspring of a god of Mount Olympus. Undoubtedly, This was another instance of Zeus taking advantage of a queen/princess, with Helen being the result of this encounter. Later, Agamemnon's brother, Menelaus, king of the Argives, won Helen, and Agamemnon married Helen's sister. Afterward, Menelaus stayed in Sparta. He eventually inherited the throne and even recently led his army to the outskirts of the fortress, meeting with all countries there. In such a case, Paris' search for Helen was in essence an attempt to seize the wife of the king of Sparta, and thus the decisive 10-year war erupted. Now, even without another Trojan War, the Spartans would never accept such a humiliation. They would make their enemies pay twice over. "How are things outside?" Finding a spot to sit down casually, Lane asked. "Quite well. With a planned inside and out approach, we broke through the right wing of the alliance. Although Agamemnon reacted quickly and did not let the defeat turn into a rout, we still achieved the effect we wanted. Several commanders of the alliance died as a result, and a few small countries were completely annihilated. And most importantly, after this battle, there will be no chance of united action among the alliance anymore." Her eyes sparkling like stars, Andrea said with a smile, "They will be suspicious of each other, blaming each other. Those who are severely damaged will blame those who suffered less. Those who have lost family members will blame those whose relatives are still alive. Just like Lord Ilos said, once suspicion arises, it is hard to erase. Even if the all-gods could unify them with might, they can't sway the hearts of men. So, if everything goes as expected, the next steps of the alliance will see them splitting up. Only by letting them break through on their own can they recover the faltering morale." Clearly, after recent learning and trials, Andrea had grown increasingly familiar with these matters. Lane just smiled and continued to inquire. "What do you think? Then, are you planning to block everyone from reaching Athens?" "No, we can't do that. Even if we win one battle, their strength still surpasses ours. Besides, the gods on Mount of the Gods who are enemies of the goddess may also intervene." Shaking her head slightly, Andrea then spoke resolutely. "We need to retreat temporarily, but it won't always be this way. The retreat is only to accumulate strength, and I've already ordered the evacuation of the border residents. We will defend at several key passageways leading directly to Athens, resisting the alliance's progress at every turn. Ultimately, at the very foot of the city of Athens, will be the final battleground for victory. All invaders will find their graves there." Nodding lightly, Lane saw no issues with this strategy. Moreover, from beginning to end, the outcome of this war was never just about the mortal realm. Delaying enough time was naturally the best course of action. After all, even Lane himself wasn't too clear when those remnants drifting in the void would truly arrive in Chaos's mortal realm. Splash! Thousands of miles away, atop the profound and endless East Sea, waves roared, and the storm never ceased. Far back in the Third Era, before the ancient sea god had fallen into slumber, the near seas of Chaos were always calm. But as the Second Era drew to a close, dark tides started to become more frequent. The power of the Lord of Ocean Currents began to infiltrate inward from the outer sea, and a new sea emperor emerged, a tyrant of earth-shaking might. Since then, storms became a norm upon the vast ocean, with only a few shipping routes remaining undisturbed. And clearly, this deserted sea area far from the continent was not within those safe shipping routes. Hoo! Splash! Intense hurricanes occasionally skimmed over the surface, turning the sea into tornadoes. No vessel could withstand such sailing conditions, nor confront the natural might of heaven and earth. However, the few traveling eastward at the bottom of the sea were anything but panicking. Because no storm was big enough to reach them here, and because none of them were of the sort to be frightened by mere meteorology, they halted here for another reason entirely. "Alamus, is this the place you spoke of?" Hercules said gravely, playing with a mirror in front of him. If one were to simply look at his countenance and tone at the moment, they might think they were about to face some frightful enemy. However, standing beside him, Alamus was just trying to hold back his smile. Not that the enemy was too formidable, though it was indeed fearsome to Alamus himself, but having witnessed Hercules's prowess several times along the journey, he had already affirmed the great hero's martial might. In fact, while Hercules was indeed a bit anxious, his trepidation was directed at the spying mirror before him. In terms of strength, the great hero was undeniably formidable. Yet with such delicate alchemy products, Hercules was nothing more than a greenhorn. Cough, cough. With a light cough, Alamus pretended not to notice. Seeing such a powerful hero encounter things beyond his ken added a touch more humanity to him. Look! Then, his attention focusing intently on the spying mirror, a moment later, Alamus suddenly pointed. Following the direction of his hand, Hercules saw a flash of black light. What is that? That is the Caucasus eagle, offspring of the king of all monsters, and a demon beloved by the storms. Wherever it appears, hurricanes rage in the sky. It is said that the king of all monsters once summoned a black storm capable of world destruction, and perhaps the Caucasus giant eagle has inherited this ability. Alamus spoke slowly, having mentioned this demon more than once in the days gone by. Now they were not far from the sea, and the Caucasus giant eagle was the last barrier. If they could leap past it, the capabilities of their alchemy ship would clear the path ahead for them. Can't we just detour around it? He asked, appearing not overly concerned. Amon seemed to be seeking presence, but Alamus still answered earnestly. That won't do, just like I've said before. The Caucasus divine eagle possesses peerless eye power, allowing it to see everything above and below the water. It may not see through the disguises of alchemy, but it will surely detect our ship's presence. And unfortunately for us, there are no ordinary sea beasts living here apart from ourselves. We've nowhere to hide, or rather, it has likely already discovered us. It's just that the power of the sea whale boat is too overwhelming, and it hasn't yet confirmed what kind of being we are. Without continuing, Hercules understood Alamus's point. Even if the creature was still uncertain whether the so-called giant boat was alive or not, demons do not require proof. For the Caucasus divine eagle, if it truly detected something it couldn't identify, its first instinct would surely be destruction, not to let it pass. So from this moment, they had already entered a dangerous zone. No matter, it would be best if it chose to let us pass. After an attempt proved futile, the great hero temporarily abandoned trying to understand the workings of the spying mirror on his own. He casually picked up an iron club that lay next to him, measuring its heft in his hand. The Caucasus eagle flew high above, its speed in the sky something Hercules could not hope to match. But the great hero had never feared difficulty. To him, it was merely another trial in a life full of them. Since we're not far, let's quickly dispose of it. If this demon insists on standing in our way, I'll just have to remove it. Throughout the journey, Hercules realized he had a certain affinity with the offspring left by the king of all monsters. It's just that every encounter seemed to bring them nothing but a brush with death. Chapter 863, Bloodline. Splish splash. Screech. In the center of the East Sea, waves surged immensely. Billions of tons of seawater flowed from south to north ceaselessly, and waves higher than 100 meters were common. They weren't far from the sea. Even the wounds pounded into the ocean were affecting this area. If their vision were infinitely raised, one might see a giant clockwise vortex, tirelessly swallowing everything night and day. This place was at its very edge, the last chance for those lost to escape. Once further forward, no mortal ship could escape the sea. It was like a black hole, endlessly devouring all of the universe. Screech! Above in the sky, amidst the clouds. With a resounding cry that pierced the heavens, an almost imperceptible black dot patrolled its territory. Its wings fluttered, whipping up towering hurricanes. Under the divine eagle's sharp gaze, no life could escape. But this was meaningless to Heracles, as he had never intended to flee. Boom! With a loud noise, the sea surface exploded into a void, and the great hero, clad in beast skins, leapt out from it. Looking up at the fading black dot in the sky, Heracles rallied the chi and blood around his body. His strong will turned his strength into a spear pointing remotely at the demon in the sky. Had he a choice, Heracles would not wish to battle the Caucasus divine eagle. Unlike the sea monsters and the nine-headed serpent monster, this sovereign of the skies seemed to disregard humans. On earth, it shrieked atop the peaks. At sea, it loved to battle around the sea eye. Should the creature retreat out of fear of his aura, the great hero had no intention of pursuing. For a moment, it was as if the local ocean waves froze in time, the two beings in the sky and on the sea locking gazes. In that brief moment, Heracles thought he saw a mix of anger and joy in the eyes of the eagle. But everything was so fleeting. The next moment, the storm-wielding demon dove from the sky, vehemently attacking the great hero. Clearly, the Caucasus divine eagle had no intention of giving way. For this invader, who dared enter its territory, it launched an attack without hesitation. Caucasus divine eagle, I did not wish to be your enemy. But this place does not belong to you. If you insist on using force to prevent me from meeting the ruler here, then I must achieve my goal by force. Rising to his call, Heracles didn't know if the creature had the intelligence to understand his words, but he still clarified his stance as if facing an opponent. However, the divine eagle did not stop. In the next instant, it swooped down like a black lightning bolt through the heavens. Between the sky and the great sea, the demon's sharp claws collided with the hero's iron rod. Boom! Screech! Waves were lifted and fell like rain. The sun descended from the sky, and the moon took its place, illuminating the vast ocean. With another swing of his weapon, Heracles slammed the black-feathered, golden-eyed divine eagle into the sea. Unlike the demons he faced before, this time, the great hero encountered no trouble. A simple fight, no fancy clashes, just a battle of strength against strength, and in this regard, Heracles' superiority was indisputable. In later myths, as the only mortal who defeated God King Zeus in hand-to-hand combat, few could surpass him in sheer strength. The Caucasus divine eagle could not, and so it was doomed not to succeed. However, standing on the waves of the great sea, although the fight was going smoothly, the great hero felt no joy, because this battle did not feel like a true fight. From beginning to end, the demon capable of controlling storms did not use its advantages. It did not rely on speed to maneuver, nor did it take advantage of the sky. As the king of birds in strength, it fought like a beast, engaging in a bloody battle with the great hero. Splish-splash, screech, a sharp cry, then it leaped out of the waves. One wing of the divine eagle was broken, but its golden eyes showed no fear. The black lightning charged at Heracles, but this time the great hero did not swing his rod to meet it. He extended his right hand and in a flash, grabbed the soaring shadow. The eagle's beak pierced his palm, blood flowing down. But Heracles paid it no mind. He just looked at the already exhausted divine eagle and asked the question in his heart. Caucasus divine eagle, I had no intention of being your enemy. If you want to leave, I couldn't possibly hold you. So what drives you to fight me to the death? Could it be that there is something here that is critical to you? The outcome is the outcome, the process is the process. Locking eyes with the divine eagle's golden vertical pupils, Heracles did not shift his gaze. After a long while, the struggle in his palm gradually subsided. The great hero hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened his hand. Son of Zeus, do you also understand honor and dignity? What did you say? His eyes widened, Heracles' breath paused. But at that moment, the previously calm Caucasus divine eagle suddenly flapped its wings. Black storms swirled between its wings, and the blood-colored flames burned upon it. The demon did not seize this opportunity to launch a surprise attack but returned to the sky, circling above the hero on the sea. What did you just say? Who is Zeus's son? Is it me? Unconcerned with breaking free, Heracles merely shouted aloud. He knew he was a demigod, but he had never known who his father was. As a descendant of chaos, there were as many demigods as hairs on a cow, and it was not unheard of for some deity's descendants to surpass their ancestors generations later. Thus, the great hero had never doubted his lineage until this moment when he heard this unfamiliar title. Ha ha ha! Zeus's son, do you actually not know who your father is? Are you also deceiving me? Or is that cunning and despicable divine king plotting some other conspiracy? But whether you truly do not know, or merely inherited your father's hypocrisy, human, I must tell you. Whoosh! With its tattered wings spread wide, the black storm grew fiercer, as if a 100-headed dragon serpent had returned to the world. The divine eagle laughed wildly. It looked at the hero enveloped by the aura of more than one slain great demon, then charged into the sky, diving down again. The offspring of the king of all monsters will never flee before Zeus's bloodline, just like those who have fallen at your hand. Today, only you die or I perish. Boom! Beneath the black wind, the great hero was forced to counterattack. Like a meteor striking the ocean, waves spread boundlessly. Above the sea, a giant surge arose once more. After a long time, the moon was about to leave the sky. As this sea area gradually returned to its earlier state, a dark figure surfaced underwater and eventually reached the surface. The enormous alchemy ship vibrated slightly, then an opening large enough for one person appeared above it. Heracles, are you all right? Calling softly, Alamus climbed out of the open skylight. He looked at the great hero on the sea and the body before him. Since the Caucasus divine eagle had abandoned its greatest speed, death was an inevitable end for it. But as it said itself, until the moment of death, it did not choose to flee. I'm fine. Just tired from a tough battle. Turning his back to Alamus, Heracles nodded and reached for the last intact part of the divine eagle. The blood-colored flames had exhausted its blood, and its bones and feathers had also been destroyed in repeated collisions. The Caucasus divine eagle only had its brain left intact, and what the great hero took were its pair of golden vertical pupils. With the demon dead, its remaining mystic powers seemed to be concentrated here. Holding it in his hand, Heracles could see through illusions and discern the truth. Alamus, I have a question for you. Turning around and striding back inside the ship, the great hero returned to the vessel. As for the shattered body of the divine eagle, he planned to find the mountain range known as Caucasus later and bury it. There was no enmity between them except, if at all, that which came from his father whom he had never met. Alamus, in your memory, in your earlier experiences, did you learn about the offspring of the divine king? Of course. Although Alamus did not know why Heracles asked such a question, matters related to Zeus were widespread in the realm of chaos. Just what he had heard could fill a shelf of leather scrolls. Heracles, you know? In the mortal world, all the famous monarchs and heroes are of the deity's bloodline. Only the wizards, who stole knowledge and strength from the hands of the gods, are not. And the divine king is the chief among all gods, so his lineage is the most powerful. Thus, from ancient times, no child of the divine king has failed to make a great name in the mortal realm. The most widely known today, Lord Perseus of Perseus, is one of them. Why do you suddenly ask about this? What about the heroes themselves? Without answering, Heracles asked again. Like how they came into this world and how they grew up. Well, that's quite a tale. Recalling briefly, Alamus summarized. Every hero has their own story, but if you want a common theme, there are some similarities. Like the story always begins with the divine king favoring a certain princess, queen, and the story's middle is the divine king's offspring establishing their deeds under the guidance and training of all gods. Or they conceived dark thoughts, desecrating the deities, thinking they could stand shoulder to shoulder with gods. The former naturally ends well. Perseus of Perseus hence ascended to heaven, was granted eternal divinity, and should still be alive today. The latter, however, were punished, as a warning to the kingdoms of the mortal realm. As for the fates of those princesses and queens, some died young, and some were never heard from again. These are what I know. Is that so? Thank you very much. After a moment of silence, Heracles expressed his thanks. Alamus waved his hand, indicating these were just stories that had been passed down. But since they had dealt with the Caucasus Divine Eagle, it was time for the ship to set off again. After all, it wouldn't be long before they entered the escape range of the CI, and even if they did nothing, the group would uncontrollably slide toward that abyss. Yes, you're right. It's time we departed. Legend has it that the Bronze Creator is a sage among the gods. Who knows if the rumor is true? With a rumble, the giant alchemy ship once again sank into the sea depths. Their journey to the East Sea was finally about to reach its destination. Chapter 864 The Departed is Dead. CI The Wound of the Ocean. Those who had never seen it with their own eyes often attempted to describe it with florid language. People imagined it as a massive whirlpool, speculating on the sound of colliding waves. Poets depicted it as the abyss, calling it the source of the ocean's darkness. Before he came here in person, Heracles had read many accounts about it and queried elders about the real appearance of the CI. With Alamus's first-hand narrative, the great hero even thought he had understood it enough. But it wasn't until he sailed into this place himself that he faced the terror striking straight into his soul. Heracles realized how inadequate mere words could be at times. Sound seemed devoured. The surge of the waves was no longer visible. Light could not penetrate here, for the sea's loathing for the sun converged in this place. It was as if one were walking alone in the dark, cold universe, uncertain of one's position, nor knowing if one was really moving. But one thing was clear. Behind him lay the increasingly distant world of man, and ahead, the profound abyss that devoured everything. Although I had made ample preparations and had anticipated the situation, at this moment, I still felt a trace of dread. Though I can overcome it, it remains, growing ever stronger. Alamus, are you telling me my will is not firm enough? Or is there some issue with this region of the sea itself? In the cockpit, holding an iron rod, the great hero asked his teammate, as though he was also questioning his own heart. At this moment, everything outside was equally projected. Where they were now was nothing but endless darkness and void. Staring at the instruments in front of him, in response to Heracles' self-inquiry, Alamus shook his head slightly. He understood this psychology, for once they had felt the same. There's no need for self-deprecation, Heracles. It's not your fault, on the contrary. Nearly everyone would feel this way. Believe me, your heart isn't fearing the darkness, nor the seawater and green waves. You're just afraid of yourself, afraid of what you do not know, those powers beyond your control and comprehension. As a human, one fears the unknown, fears the sudden changes that could occur at any moment. Even if I have been here once before, I still feel anxious about this place. Slowly lifting his head, Alamus looked into the darkness ahead. Here, no light could function. Even the products of alchemy could not defy the special rules of this place. There's no other reason, but because I know, the decision of whether I can leave here alive is never up to me, but at someone else's whim. You're the same, Heracles. Believe me, as long as you cannot shake the entire ocean, the moment you see this scene, you will feel a panic coming from deep within. This is a common trait of humanity, a weakness that all intelligent beings possess. The fear of the unknown and respect for things beyond one's understanding stem from this. You're right, Alamus. Compared to the entire ocean, I am still too weak. Nodding slightly, the hero accepted this reality. However, looking at the darkness that seemed to swallow everything in front of him, Heracles couldn't help asking. CI is the wound of the ocean. I cannot affect its existence. But if that's the case, then even if we were to meet the Bronze Creator, how could we possibly take him away? Alamus did not respond, and the hero did not inquire further. He probably didn't know either, but perhaps the prescient Creator would have a way. And so, in silence, the vast sea endured immense tearing, as the alchemy ship continued to sink. Drip drop, drip drop. In the cold, silent space there was nothing, only the sound of liquid dropping, day and night, without pause. Alone, enjoying his solitude, Prometheus kept his eyes closed. Over the centuries, apart from mortals who had strayed here for various reasons, only some guests with ulterior motives would come. As for the rest of the time, it was left to him to endure the relentless torment of the boundless sea. Drip drop, drip drop. Another year. In the darkness, a hoarse voice emitted from his chest. Perhaps from not speaking for a long time, the tone was somewhat unrecognizable. Opening his eyes, Prometheus struggled to lift his head. Without any tools to measure time, he used the frequency of his blood drops to keep count. For hundreds of years, the divine iron piercing his chest caused his blood to be enough to fill a lake. This was the most trivial part of his punishment, and even considered a convenience by the fire thief. Just as he said, another year had gone by, but at this moment the reason for Prometheus's upward gaze was different. For at the edge of his perception, something familiar was approaching. When was the last time? Maybe it was a few years ago, maybe decades. When those sailing the ships appeared here, Prometheus was astonished to find that the humans of today had actually built ships capable of traveling underwater. And yet just a few hundred years ago, they had only just learned to harness the winds for sailing, understanding how to navigate by the stars above. The fourth generation of humans was far wiser than those of the first three ages. Although this also brought more shortcomings, Prometheus believed it was all worth it. Nothing is perfect, and if it were, perhaps its imperfection would be the most important piece of the puzzle in constituting its perfection. Another fleet of ships? Prometheus? Guess why they have come? You know, just like every time before. They fall into the water by accident, encounter mishaps, tell you of the various wonders of the outside world, then leave with your help. Yet, from the moment they return to dry land, all you receive are curses and slander. Some are unwilling, and thus they die. Others remain silent, and thus they never get the chance to speak again. In the end, the remaining ones gradually come to believe it is you who brings disaster to humanity, so you rightfully should use your pain to help them gain wealth and divine favor. Oh, I forgot to say, pain can become a habit. And how do you make it so one can never get used to pain? The answer is to let them see the light every once in a while. Maybe someone was speaking, or maybe it was just an illusion. But from beginning to end, Prometheus made no response at all. It was unknown when it began, but another life seemed to have been born in the pitch-black depths of the sea. Those who had come here with intent had never discovered him, or rather, only Prometheus himself could hear his voice. Do you not hate them? Do you not loathe them? You love humans, but humans may not all love you. Let's do this. Use your intelligence. Use your foresight. Choose the kind-hearted ones and leave the wicked here. There's nothing wrong with that. You're merely giving them their deserved ending. Prometheus, am I wrong? 1 second it was gently persuasive, the next its voice suddenly rose sharply. The voice, whose origin was unknown, seemed to become frantic, questioning the imprisoned Titan if there was anything wrong with what it had said. Yet the dark space remained silent, as if nothing had ever happened. Time passed slowly, the voice in his ears now mild, now arrogant, now humble, now haughty. Like a lunatic with multiple personalities, it was constantly venting its emotions. After a long while, tranquility finally returned to the fire thief's ears. I am leaving, aren't you happy? Silent in the noise, outspoken in the quiet. When the mysterious voice ceased speaking, at some moment, the hoarse voice of the fire thief finally echoed in the space. But what he said would startle anyone. Prometheus was going to leave the sea, an utter impossibility. Heracles fancied he could manage it, but in truth, without assistance, there was never any chance of success from the outset. The divine king's authority had chained this Titan god, and no one could release him without Zeus's knowledge. But this time, it was the mysterious voice's turn to be silent. You are my choice, and I could offer you the strength to change it all. Prometheus, why must you refuse me? Of course, it's because I no longer have the strength. After all, carrying humans is tiring enough, let alone bearing the hatred of the divine king, which is indeed too heavy. His words were slow but clear. On the iron stake, Prometheus tried to muster a smile, but ultimately he failed. And besides, you choosing me isn't really because I am the most suitable. It's simply because my divine blood gave you reason, making me your first targeted choice. But I hope you remember, you are neither me nor him. You are a separate entity. The desire for revenge against the divine king is his will, not yours. Just as I look upon humanity, I witnessed your emergence. I hope that one day, you will also find the meaning of your own existence. Without any response, but Prometheus knew the life that had been born in the depths of the sea. I had heard him. Although it did not speak, it actually listened to him. As for its true origin, cough cough, the progenitor of countless demons. Among those recorded in history, the only great being who has fallen is probably him alone. Violent coughing, accompanied by spurts of blood. Typhon was undoubtedly dead. As to the one in the sea, just like Prometheus said, it was an independent life, an existence that at first even lacked clear thought. And the proud lord of 10,000 demons would probably never be able to resurrect again. Chapter 865, Changing Space. Uncertain whether it was up or down, the hull merged with the swirling currents. Like a speck of dust falling to the earth, apart from instruments showing parameters, there was nothing to prove that they were moving forward. Standing at the very front of the cockpit, in front of Heracles, the indicator of the ship's status was slowly turning blood red. Even gliding with the flow, the alchemy ancient ship had reached its limit. It could not progress any further, for at the very heart of the sea, the pressure was enough to keep the body of a Titan's god in a constant state of dissolution and repair. This last stretch, nothing could take their place and move forward. Last time, we just stepped directly into the sea. Leaving the protection of the alchemy ship, we faced the vortex that could tear us apart into thousands of pieces in an instant. For thousands of years, billions of tons of seawater have been accumulating energy in rotation. It's released force enough to shake mountains. And even just an insignificant fraction of it is still enough to suppress a mortal like me. Approaching the isolation chamber's door, Alamus walked in slowly. Even though he had experienced it once before, this time, he still had no assurance of survival. We can't do more, or rather, there's only one thing we can do. That is to pray that the creator of the Bronze Age notices us, just like every previous time. And this time too, he still chooses kindness. Perhaps, but I never leave my fate to destiny. Whether or not someone comes to help me, I will reach the place I want to go. Tightening the leather on his body, Heracles walked into the isolation chamber, waving to the one behind him. Amon, I'm entrusting you to look after the ship here. Your body is still a bit weak. I'll teach you some moves when we have the chance. No problem. Without looking back, the doors of the isolation chamber closed behind him. As Heracles moved forward, the sound of doors shutting one after another rang in his ears. In deep waters with currents this strong, opening a window directly would instantly tear the hull to shreds. So all airtight doors were closed securely, and the water reserves from all directions began to pour into the isolation chamber. Alamus, good luck. I hope to see you again later. I will. And I wish you safety on your journey, my friend. Soon, when the chamber was filled with seawater, the isolation zone's outer door slowly opened. Heracles stepped forward and leaped. The next moment, amidst the vast expanse of the sea, there was one more human, diminutive as a speck of dust. Thud, thud, thud. Turbulence in all directions, no left, no right. Leaving the alchemy ship, in just an instant, the great hero could no longer find his way back. The undercurrent surged from every angle, his limbs as if dragging on galloping steeds. Only by truly stepping into this place did Heracles finally understand why Alamus had refused his offer of help and instead entrusted their hope of survival to that benevolent god. Personal strength, no matter how great, has its limits. But the power of nature is infinite. It is the marvel of the world's creation. If Heracles were on the surface of the sea, he could still use his strength as leverage, maximizing the force he could exert. But here, even with all his strength, it was ultimately futile. His heart throbbed violently in his chest as ceaseless energy surged from every inch of his body. No matter how much he struggled, Heracles could only follow the waves, unable to control his own direction. Now you understand. This is nature, the force of all things in this world. And the reason why gods seem powerful is less due to their divine power and more due to their authority rooted in the origin of the world. You battle the earth god, you're shaking the foundations of the earth. You oppose the sea god, you're fighting the boundless ocean. Don't be fooled by my usual lack of combat prowess. That's only on the mortal world. Just like here. Right now, you're not even a match for me. The voice echoed in his mind, and in the pocket on the hero's chest, the puppet seemed entirely unaffected by the sea eye. A thin film of light covered it, preventing a single drop of seawater from reaching it. How's Alamus? How is he doing? Instead of seeking help right away, Heracles instead inquired about his companion's condition. Though he was being swept along with the currents, the sea here actually couldn't harm him. After all, the center of the sea eye hadn't fallen upon him. And with the animal hide on his body, the great hero's condition actually wasn't as desperate as it seemed. Well, he's doing fine right now. Although he barely lasted less than the duration of a water clock before his strength gave out. But just a second before he could turn back, divine power protected his life. That's not surprising. Since the battle with Typhon, the laws in many nearby sea areas have become somewhat similar to those of the land, but not so much here. After all, without the aid of divine power, even with the fire thief's divine body being so powerful, his strength would have long ago been worn to dust by the sea eye. C3 to 58. Clack. Tumbling out of his pocket, Andy explained as he gradually made his way up from his chest, until he was sitting on Heracles' shoulder. His movements remained unaffected amidst the swirling undercurrents, and even between the indistinct shadows, the puppet's state seemed noticeably different from before. A sense of the divine rose from the tiny doll, and for a moment, Heracles felt the surrounding water currents quiet down. So this is a deity, even if Andy was just a faith god and not the naturally sacred nature god he spoke of. Yet when the shackles upon him were partially removed, he remained a king, supreme over the mortal world. At that moment, the self-satisfaction that had crept into the great hero's heart in recent days vanished without a trace. Drifting in the dark current, Heracles once again straightened his attitude. Confidence is good, but if one cannot correctly measure the gap between oneself and others, then every ounce of trust becomes nothing but a brick to bury oneself. You need not envy me. It's hard to say for innate gods, but becoming a faith god like me might not be so difficult for you. However, what is gained from faith must ultimately be constrained by it. Never mind, that is a matter for the future. For now, I will take you there directly. He has already noticed me, and if it weren't for my presence, perhaps you would have already been scooped up by his divine power. Let's go. Follow this path straight ahead, and at its end, you'll see Prometheus bound. Speaking softly, the puppet's index finger then stretched out. In the next instant, like a titan tearing through clouds, the sea water transformed under the influence of divine power. The void faintly vibrated, and quickly, a temporary spatial passage materialized before them. It existed alongside the surrounding sea water as if on two different dimensions, with no interaction between them. At the same time, Heracles finally regained his lost sense of direction. This was the power of divinity, changing space. Perhaps the great beings who created divinity, sensing the disadvantages of faith gods, who were neither born with great authority like the nature gods nor could draw infinite divine power from their godhood, relied solely on faith to sustain their existence, holding authority that was largely inconsequential. Thus, when the holders of divinity one day elevated their realms and became true deities, they could access unique knowledge and power from their divinity. With these abilities, Faith deities might not have the advantage in front of gods who truly commanded related authorities, but in other situations they could dominate completely. Over time, many would lament. Their divinity felt as though it were a part taken from a divine artifact. Not only did it enable them to become gods, but also granted them additional authority, even if it didn't seem quite complete. Of course, that was merely speculation. After all, if such an artifact did exist, it would definitely be beyond their comprehension. All right. With the water around him pushed aside, Heracles took the opportunity to leap into the channel that had been temporarily carved out. His virility subtly rising, the moisture on his clothes evaporated. But, do you intend to accompany me? Yes. Nodding slightly, the puppet affirmed. Speaking of which, a long, long time ago, I too revered him greatly. But later on, I thought that perhaps he was indeed too young at the time. Drip drip, drip drip. Within the dark space, the sound of flowing blood continued unceasingly. The bound one bore the pain, carrying the sins of an era. Suspended in the air before him, an unconscious middle-aged man lay there. However, compared to the fire thief's wounds, no injury marked the man's body. Top? Lifting his head gently, Prometheus looked in the direction of the sound. In his perception, one young, one elusive breath drew near, and on both of them, there exuded an aura that the fire thief found familiar. Top? A flame ignited. Kindled by spirit, fire burned upon his shoulder. Stepping out from darkness, Heracles locked eyes with Prometheus just as he emerged. Hands bound together, iron nails stained red with blood and driven into his chest. Not like a deity, but as a prisoner meets a hero. Facing the creator he had longed to see, Heracles found himself speechless. You are the Bronze Age creator, the sacred fire thief, forethinker Prometheus? Cough, cough, cough. Yes, it's me. If what you speak of is how people refer to me, then that indeed pertains to me. Breathing hoarsely, his voice seemed to have traversed the ages. Gazing upon the young and fearless visitor, Prometheus exhaled deeply. Son of Zeus, beloved of the era, O humans, you have finally come. Chapter 866. Divine Iron. Finally, you have come. Along the path marked by Andy, Heracles avoided the numerous challenges near the center of the sea. Only by experiencing it firsthand did Heracles realize that the true danger of this oceanic trauma was not on the surface. The divine flame left over from the great day, the lingering resentments of the countless beings that had perished in the ocean over the millennia, and even the twisted and undying spirits of evil creatures, all things that the ocean could not accommodate had slowly converged here, becoming part of the sea. Of course, perhaps due to these forces being loose and chaotic or possibly some other reason, with En's help, they were unable to breach the protection of the divine power. Thus, the great hero Heracles safely reached the hollow at the center of the sea and met the person he wished to see. Just as the legends recorded, the sinful god was imprisoned beneath the sea abyss, his hands bound by chains, and a divine nail piercing his chest. However, it was such a captive who spoke words that should not have been spoken. Finally, you have come. No matter how you look at it, such words should not have appeared here. Since Heracles had decided to search for the creator Prometheus and had only recently learned that he was the son of the divine king, he had never consulted with anyone. Except for one exception. Do you know a human named Avon? Did he tell you of my existence? If so, please tell me, what is the purpose of having me come here? Heracles spoke gravely, immediately thinking of that scholar from Athens. It was he who had inspired the thought of searching for Prometheus. If anyone were likely to have predicted his actions, it would be him. Avon, the bound deity, slightly startled upon hearing the words, seemingly taken aback. But it was only for a moment before Prometheus regained his composure. Indeed, he shook his head with difficulty as the forethinking god looked at the wary yet hopeful great hero and spoke slowly and gently. No, child, I do not know him. But not long ago, someone did tell me that a child living in lies would come here. I also witnessed your valiant fighting on the sea surface. You are brave, yet also reckless. These may not be good traits, but for a young man, they certainly are excellent qualities. Rest assured, whatever questions you have, I can answer them, including about the one who met with me, what he gave me, and what he spoke to me about. Whatever you wish to know, I will tell you everything. Why? Silent and somewhat feeling surreal. At that moment, Heracles was certain. His innate intuition told him that this ancient god was truly not deceiving him, not attempting to fabricate lies or masking concealment with lofty reasons, as every other individual he had questioned before led others to guess their thoughts. So, on impulse, the great hero unknowingly asked, "Probably because I have already made the same mistake once. My mistake taught me that concealment only leads to suspicion, and suspicion leads to conflict. It causes the greedy to forget the risks, and the cautious to miss opportunities. Rather than having people walk down the wrong path in speculation, it is better to tell them the cruel truth from the start. The destruction of the Bronze Age originated from this. If they had known their insignificance early on, fear might be closer to survival than arrogance." Whoosh! Perhaps he had spoken too much in a short time, as Prometheus took a slight breath, causing the chains on his wrists to lightly clink. Regaining his composure, Heracles then remembered the other's current state. He took a step forward and solemnly said, "Regardless, Prince Prometheus, whether or not you can answer my doubts, I believe in your morality and am willing to help you escape from this prison. I'm not sure if stealing the heavenly fire is indeed a sin, but including myself, every human now living should not use this as a reason to condemn you. You've been here long enough, and today is the day you will be released." Stepping close to Prometheus' side, Heracles thought he would encounter some hindrance, but to his surprise, he easily approached the captive god. His hands reached for the divine nail in Prometheus' chest, powerful strength flowing with the movements of his chest. Andy, who had been silent until now, also covered him with divine strength. A sense of unprecedented power rose in Heracles' heart at that moment. "One nail cannot stop me. Rise!" With a loud shout, like a sovereign pulling up mountains. Perhaps it was the effect of will, or perhaps his lineage was truly powerful. When divine power was bestowed upon him, Heracles seemed to possess a demeanor capable of wrestling with the divine king for a moment. Responding to the call, the divine nail in Prometheus' chest buzzed, vibrating slightly in the creator's chest. Even though Prometheus was initially ready to speak out to stop him, he was somewhat astonished at that moment. Incredibly, the divine nail, embodying the divine king's will, was not meant to be removed so easily. Apart from the initial shaking, no matter how hard Heracles tried, it remained immobile, with no possibility of being pulled out. Even so, the fact that it could cause such a change was still extraordinary. After all, although the nail was cast when Zeus had not yet stepped into the great divine power of a god-king. The power of sovereignty has no boundaries. The commands of a king from past days, too, would become transcendent with future strength. In such circumstances, that Heracles could make it shake relied not merely on strength, but on a certain embodiment of fate. Perhaps he was always destined to surpass Zeus in some aspects, even though he himself did not yet realize it. Ahem! Enough! Stop wasting your energy. The punishment from the God King is not so easily undone, and what truly traps me has never been merely this nail. It's merely a symbol, a medium. I can break free from it, but as long as the God King's power persists, someone brought here by the will of Zeus must be forever bound in this abyss. Heracles cleared his throat lightly, a hazy halo emanating from Prometheus. The shaking nail immediately returned to its original state, and Heracles was rebounded from it. The hero might not know that just as he had started moving, the waters at the sea eye of the East Sea suddenly surged up into frightful waves, like a giant deity reaching down from the sky, trying to grasp this handful of the ocean. The strength of Zeus's sovereignty is also not infinite. It was the sea, over which he purportedly no longer had jurisdiction, that he used to entrap Prometheus. It merged with the nail, becoming a symbol of the God King's sea suppressing. From then on, The crimes of suppressing an innate god and quelling the turmoil of the sea were skillfully balanced, ensuring Zeus would no longer need to be troubled by them. Your power! Prometheus, stepping lightly backward from the gentle recoil in front of him. Heracles' eyes shifted. Just then, Prometheus had nonchalantly separated him from the divine nail connected to the sea. Though both derived from divine power, his seemed much stronger than that of Andy. And noticing Heracles' confusion, the forethinker explained with a smile. Faith isn't born solely from prayers. Child, if you are a deity, if your deeds can be spread far and wide, then the journey you've made to this point is your best support in gathering faith. All right, now, let me give you what rightfully belongs to you. His body shook, and under Heracles' gaze, the forethinker's body suddenly split into two. One body, composed entirely of divine power, remained there, while the real body of Prometheus departed. Watching this scene, entirely different from what he had anticipated, Heracles was once again astonished. And sitting on his shoulder, a tiny puppet suddenly spoke up. This is truly unexpected. Even confined here, you've nearly reached the realm of great divine power. No wonder bronze humanity was destroyed. If they, like this generation of humans, had continued to spread across the continent, your power might have been enough to frighten even Zeus of that era. Had the God King of the Bronze Age not taken that step, and had the Bronze Age not been destroyed, the forethinker might indeed have been qualified to threaten Zeus's position. Thus, even though the actions of the all-gods were rough and seemed forceful, they showed no mercy in dealing with him. Who is this? Breaking free from the chains and divine iron, Prometheus could not maintain this state for long. Even for him, being bound to the divine iron probably consumed less energy. At this moment, he was both defeating the divine iron's sensing and bearing the weight of the sea, his divine power draining every second. Compared to before, although his divine blood continually dripped, even the not particularly strong body of a Titan's deity like Prometheus could cope with this minor damage. Who am I? I am the creator of the Bronze Age. I want to ask you, do you remember Andy? Raising his head slightly, the puppet's face was expressionless, as it should be. However, the next moment, Prometheus's reaction left it stunned. Andy, if you refer to the Andy in my memories, there indeed was one. He pondered for a moment. Prometheus slowly said, he was among the third group of created bronze humanity, endowed with a soul of kindness, humility, and integrity. How so? Is he still alive? No, he died. Died from his kindness, humility, and integrity. The reason I came to ask you was just to see if the legendary fire thief remembered the name of each of his creations is indeed true. The answer was, of course, true, as the outcome was evident right before his eyes. Never having served a day as priest, nor particularly esteemed by those cunning favored by the created beings, he ultimately faced death alongside the creatures of the Bronze Age due also to the foolish acts of the priests, falling in the darkness just before dawn. Previously, Andy didn't seem so indifferent about this, but now one of his questions had been resolved. I have no more questions, but he does. The voice stiff, the puppet's tone was flat. We've come here to seek you, mainly to understand some secrets about the depths of the spirit realm. Chapter 867, Sacrifice. Spirit realm. It seems you originally wished to inquire about the Lord of the spirit realm. After all, among the deities still active in the world today, my father is one of the few who has had considerable contact with him. Prometheus's expression brightened as he reached out. The next moment, he pulled a purple-covered book from the darkness. The dark purple cover was adorned with gloomy patterns, and all sorts of negative emotions seemed to reflect in the viewer's heart through the letters on it. Looking at the book, Heracles felt as if he'd smelt a pungent odor, yet his reason told him it was purely a mental illusion. Is this what you spoke of, the item given to you by the person who told you I would come here? Heracles's gaze fixed upon the book's surface, confirming he did not recognize the script. Yet, at times, he felt as if he was recognizing it, as though he was trying to understand it and it was trying to understand the person viewing it. Shifting his gaze away, the great hero asked. Yes, this is what he gave me. He originally intended for me to use the knowledge within to instruct you, but after some thought, I decided to give it directly to you. Prometheus extended the book to Heracles, adding, deciphering it is not an easy task, but over the millennia, I've come to understand much of it. The contents originate from a place called the 9 Layers of Hell, its author unknown, and the book itself is named the Purgatory Book. It seems like a fine gift, but I do not believe there is such a thing as unmerited favor in this world. Taking the book, Heracles spoke slowly, while Prometheus nodded. Yes, I believe the same. However, that person's intentions seem quite clear. He appears to have a bad relationship with the divine king of Olympus, hence he found me, wishing to use me as a pawn. Of course, he told me, there will come a human who has been deceived by deities, one with the power to influence the world's order. Brave of heart, yet he hovers between good and evil. He has a steadfast goal, yet does not know that very goal is the source of his suffering. He hopes I could assist you, in the manner he desires, evidently. I'm merely the envisioned whetstone, and you the actual blade. Frank and direct, as if it were agreed upon from the beginning. Prometheus did not conceal any of his past experiences, nor did he believe Heracles should not know them. Heracles's hand trembled slightly as he tried to open the book, inhaling deeply upon hearing Prometheus's words. The words of the bronze creator resonated with a sense of déjà vu, affirming some long-buried speculations. Then, can this book reverse death? Yes, and not only reverse death. There is much more it can do. For instance, it informed me of a genuine way to escape this cage that traps me here. It told me I am a being brought here by the will of Zeus, a god who sacrificed himself for humans. In theory, if I could find another brought here by Zeus's guidance, I could use the ritual track in this book to deceive order and escape living heaven. As a price, the part of my strength greater than that of the replacement would stay here to maintain the operation of this ritual track. Sadly, despite having drawn the track over the years, I have not used it. Prometheus sighed lightly, recalling his initial state of mind. Perhaps that eternally undying child who once sought the divine king's secret for immortality had thought the same. But having lived long enough, as an everlasting undying Prometheus could resist such temptations. But as a short-lived human, he ultimately made a choice. Cough, cough. I've digressed a bit. Heracles, what I want to impart to you is this. The book indeed contains many secrets, but to truly understand the text, you must have actually seen the real thing. Furthermore, despite the Purgatory Book's vast knowledge, most of it is much darker and crueler than one can imagine. Life for life, strength for strength. Prometheus spoke slowly and deliberately. The book itself is not evil. It simply tells you that everything has an order, and to gain something you must lose something. Yet, life is known as life precisely because it always carries some principles that contradict natural rules, especially the more intelligent life becomes. Humanity calls it morality, but many natural laws are in conflict with morality. I cannot choose your path, but I hope before every decision, you ask yourself, is this truly what you want? Holding the Purgatory Book in his hand, Heracles could feel Prometheus's sincerity and agreed with his perspective. For a hero like himself, be it trials or redemption, it was indeed their own morality that bound them. Thus, the mythical Hercules was willing to heed a mortal king, who could be effortlessly crushed by his hand, and undertake various tasks upon his command. Chapter 868 Sacrifice _2. And now, Heracles was the same. If he gave up the fundamental principles in his heart, he wouldn't have had to travel across the ocean. I will. Nodding heavily, Heracles found that Prometheus's face had become even paler. Clearly, despite the help of faith over the years, he still couldn't leave his cage for long. Watching this scene, there was a certain stifling feeling in Heracles's heart. Along the way, the great hero had hardly encountered any trouble. Whatever the opponent, they would ultimately fall before him. But now, facing the absolute power and might of the divine king, Facing this deity who knew he couldn't save him but still chose to help him, Heracles felt utterly helpless. The invisible prison that belonged to Prometheus was just a tiny square, and even a single step was absolutely impossible for him to take. Ha ha ha. Cough cough, don't feel sad. Your talents are exceptional, and you are still young. Perhaps one day, you might accomplish something that would stun anyone in this world. And even if I am still here, I will be happy about having helped you today. Laughter mixed with coughs. The bronze creator gently waved his hand, and Alamus, who had not yet awakened, floated from the ground to his side. Take your friend and leave. My power is running low. One day, I will find a way to rescue you. Stepping forward, it seemed as if he saw that invisible barrier, that boundary set by sovereign power. Heracles solemnly made a vow, a promise to his own soul. Prometheus smiled and nodded. For him, this was one of the rare joys he had in millennia. Wait, young man, you! Suddenly, things changed unexpectedly. A bit dazed due to the drain on his divine power, Prometheus's figure swayed, and at that moment, the previously unconscious Alamus suddenly woke up. With a strong push, the forethinker's body was pushed away from that invisible barrier. Left inside was only Alamus. Alamus, you? Caught off guard, even Heracles did not grasp what had happened. Why would Alamus do this, and more critically, how did he hide the truth that he wasn't unconscious in front of both him and Prometheus? You see, although in the mortal realm, Alamus was already a hero of remarkable strength. But in front of two deities, one an almost invincible demigod, he still seemed so feeble. All changed in an instant. Heracles instinctively wanted to move forward, but in front of him, a purple array pattern slowly emerged, blocking his way. Bang! That was the noise coming from beside him. At Heracles' side, Prometheus too was blocked by that pattern from moving forward. Heh! No use wasting your energy. Heracles, this isn't that bad. I'll stay here, you guys leave. However you think about it, this is the perfect conclusion. In the center of the purple array pattern, Alamus spoke with a voice calm as water, his face showing no extra emotions, just a slight sense of relief. Alamus! This companion who had traveled with him for many months now seemed somewhat strange to Heracles, not just because of the sudden choice he made, but also because of the hidden machinations. However, as if he saw the question in Heracles' eyes, Alamus softly explained. You actually don't need to think too much initially. I came here with no benevolence in mind. Your arrival was just an accident, and whether or not you were here, I would have come back to this place anyway. Heracles, you think yourself clever, but deep down, you still rely on your own strength. You think I am far from your match, and hence you had no guards up against me. But oh heroic one, skilled in martial arts, you were too careless. As a captain of this fleet sent by the deities, while others might be grateful for the Creator's kindness and ultimately leave the realm of all God's faith, how could I possibly leave? Being chosen to pilot this alchemy ship had to mean the church trusted me. And even if I truly abandoned my faith with my strength, how could the gods allow me to leave? Moreover, even if I retreated 1,000 steps, 10,000 steps, and did manage to leave, how could I retain such a grand alchemy ship, which would allow travel between continents and oceans? Irrefutable, Heracles had to admit that Alamus was right. There were many incongruities about his adversary, aside from these 2 points, in fact, many more. Yet he had never paid them enough attention. Perhaps it truly was pride in his own power. And in front of Heracles, Alamus continued. So there is only one conclusion left. The gods were willing to let me leave, as it was them who sent me here. This ship was left to me. If not you, someone else following the footsteps of the Creator would have come. As for why I could pretend to be unconscious and evade your censors, naturally, it is because I possess an imitation of the Netherworld King's invisibility helmet, able to shield my presence. In the original plan, I would have brought a group of passionate youths pursuing the legend of the Creator, letting most of them perish along the journey. Finally, when they barely survived and met the Bronze Creator here, I would use the deity's blessing in front of you to execute them. In the end, I would return with a few who regretted their journey midway and wavered. They will now kneel before the statues of all gods. Then we will tell the inhabitants of the continent with facts that the legends about the Creator are false, that he is brutal, cold-hearted, and utterly merciless. Calmly stated, but hearing all that Alamus said, a chill surged up within Heracles' chest, turning black into white, altering history, distorting the truth. No venomous word could suffice to describe these acts. Opening his mouth, Heracles intended to ask why the other had ultimately not proceeded as planned, but he finally didn't speak. If it was merely because he feared his martial prowess, he could have just continued pretending to be unconscious and returned with him to the continent. Since Alamus had made such a decision, what he thought was already apparent without asking. There's no need to look at me like that, Heracles. Maybe I'll regret it soon enough. Humans are always complex. The middle-aged man smiled. Then he looked at the complex-looking bronze creator. Unlike Heracles, Prometheus knew, once the other had replaced him here, there was no possibility of departure for him. Haha, Bronze Age creator, I would like to ask you a question. Ask. Not knowing how many times he had sighed today, Prometheus nodded. What I want to know is, after experiencing so much, have you ever been disappointed with the human race? Probably not. Golden Age. That perfection was just an illusion. Silver Age, my departure wasn't really because of their sins. It's just a result molded by others. No matter how perfect, it's still false. Only in the Bronze Age did I craft them with my own hands. I liked them initially. Now thinking about it, maybe it leaned more towards affection for my creations. But when I was confined here, that affection changed. For I gradually found that people who make decisions like yours are rare, and most would never think they'd sacrifice for something else in their lifetime. But when the moment comes, there will always be people like you making choices that surprise me, others, and even themselves. And that, perhaps, is the greatness distinguishing sentient beings from other species. No matter how dark, you can always find a bit of light in some corner. In the center of the sea eye, he stepped back, aligning his body with the increasingly ephemeral silhouette of divine power. Not knowing if he was satisfied with the answer, Alamus simply nodded. I see. Now, leave this place. Heracles, leave this place to complete your grand adventure. If an opportunity arises in the future, you might come back to visit me. Then, tell me your legendary story. Chapter 869 Potion. Just like when he had arrived, following a stable space tunnel, the great hero left the core of the sea eye with the creator, whose face was pale. His steps were somewhat heavy, and the events of the day struck him like a blow to the head, making Heracles once again realize his own insignificance at this moment. Even though he could accomplish many things, there were still many more things in the world that were beyond his power, no matter how hard he tried. God or human, perhaps he was born standing on a relatively high point, but it was still far from enough. For the first time in his life, aside from some persistent thoughts, the great hero longed for greater strength. As for what counts as great strength, it's not about doing whatever I want. It's about preventing things I don't want to happen from happening. On that day, I will return here and personally shatter this barrier of sin. A surge of impulse rose in his heart. Heracles looked back at the darkness behind him. However, at this moment, the person still in the darkness probably no longer had a clear consciousness. Don't overthink it, Heracles, it was, after all, his choice. And even though he's imprisoned within, Alamus is ultimately not an undying deity. Even with nearly all the strength I left there to support him, he would still fall into a state where life and death overlap. The pressure of the entire sea eye is enough to crush him. Yet this prison isn't meant for the ultimate detainment of its prisoners. On top of that, my strength will also keep him alive. So, under these circumstances, he won't experience pain like I did. It's like a grand dream. If he has the chance to come out one day, he actually won't feel anything at all. Moreover, as his face remained pale, with the equivalent ritual track cutting the flow of their differing strength at that point, Prometheus's severely depleted body also lost its source of replenishment. Looking at Heracles, whose expression was changing, the forethinking god couldn't help but want to say something more. But he opened his mouth and eventually didn't continue. There might still be secrets on Olympus, but his decision to do this was probably truly spontaneous. Prometheus had no desire to dwell on these matters, having been away from the outside world for too long. At this moment, he was more eager to see the mortal realm with his own eyes. Moreover, no matter how you look at it, the things entangling Heracles were much more terrifying than those on Olympus. What? Heracles, not having heard the last sentence, turned back and asked. The forethinking god simply waved his hand lightly, then changed the subject. I mean, there's also the purpose of your journey, he said. You came in search of the knowledge of the spirit realm, and now the Purgatory Book is in your hands. Its content may contain traps and could possibly lead you down the wrong path, but before that, it should also be able to offer you some help. After all, even if just for a certain purpose, you probably do not currently meet its requirements. Coming back to his senses, the events that happened before were so sudden that it was only now the hero remembered what he had gained. The Purgatory Book, the knowledge it recorded could even deceive the unguarded power of the Divine King. Regardless of whether it had any problems, the content it recorded was certainly extraordinary. Taking out the purple deep-colored book and looking at the mysterious, hard-to-understand script on the cover, for a moment, a strange intuition surged in Heracles' heart. Muttering in his mind what he wished to know, the hero casually flipped open a page. And the next moment, what appeared before his eyes was a picture of a mirror flickering with silver light, and in the mirror was reflected a large lake of clear black and white division. Maybe it was a lake, but seeing its size represented in the mirror, Heracles preferred to call it a sea. At the same time, in the blank space of the picture, several lines of text flashed one by one. The hero did not recognize them, but just like before, when Heracles saw these words, it seemed he also knew what they aimed to convey. This was what Andy had once told him, the legendary high-grade artifact representing the domain of space in the mortal world. Although Chaos's space-time origin rarely manifested in part, even just this fragment was enough to create this powerful magic mirror. Its might could connect all things in the world. Wherever there was no great divine power covering, the mirror could reach, possessing the ability to travel in all directions between heaven and earth. As for the scene reflected in the mirror, it was very similar to what Andy had described. It was the well of reincarnation, the end of life and death, the symbol of the cycle of all things. With the two superimposed together, no soul from any life, as long as it still existed in the world, could conceal its trace. And what the Purgatory Book recorded was their current whereabouts. The splatter mirror, the supreme treasure of the mortal realm space. It was originally kept in the temple, and you would never have been able to touch it on your own. However, due to reasons not long ago, a slight space force from beyond the heavens fell into the spirit realm. To digest this force as quickly and perfectly as possible, and to share the burden of the world itself, the ancient mirror thus fell from the highest summit of Mount Sinai, plummeting into the cyclical whirl of samsara, which erodes and cycles all things. So as long as you reach where samsara lies, you can obtain the mirror and find the answers you seek. Chapter 870 Potion _2. How am I supposed to reach this so-called samsara? Heracles, after silently chanting in his heart and under his fervent prayer, saw the original traces on the Purgatory Book fade away. The great hero casually flipped to the next page, and what presented before his eyes were two completely different images. One picture depicted a figure climbing a mountain. Almost without needing to discern, Heracles recognized that it was himself. A few lines of text appeared beside it, and once again, the great hero understood their meaning. The first path: follow the ridges of Mount Sinai, climbing step by step from the very bottom. The spirit realm is everywhere, its surface a reflection of the material world. The Sinai that pierces through the spirit realm is the center of its existence. By setting foot on the first layer of the spirit realm, you step onto the foot of Mount Sinai. Proceed along the correct path, Pass through the portals between the fourth and third layers of the spirit realm, and you will reach the land of samsara. However, the fourth layer of the spirit realm has now lost contact with the layers above and below, making entry from this path as difficult as ascending to heaven. There was no specific method, obviously. This picture seemed more like an index, a prelude. Thus, without rushing to continue with the rest, the great hero shifted his attention to the other image. On this picture, there was nothing but a winding river. Countless points of light twinkled within, and in a glimpse, it seemed like billions of souls, wailing loudly as they rushed past in the unrelenting flow they couldn't bear to remember. The second path, head inside the underworld, travel upstream along the river of oblivion. The souls of the mortal world, before being cast into the well of reincarnation, have their memories cleansed by the waters of the river of oblivion. Flowing with the rising river, avoiding all patrols along the way, you can directly reach the inside of the fourth layer of the spirit realm. This path has a chance of success, but you need the ability to reach that place and evade the might of the river of oblivion. Only if you can do this will you possibly reach the end. Compared to the former, Heracles undoubtedly found this latter method more plausible. However, for some reason, the great hero had a mysterious intuition that no matter what he chose at the moment, he would ultimately have to traverse the correct path through the spirit realm. Since he was undecided, why not take a look at both? Heracles was about to do so, but suddenly, the forethinker signaled him to stop. Don't rush, child. I know you may have seen something, but in addition to being vigilant, I need to tell you what I've learned about this book in recent years. It can answer your questions, but in a short time, it can always answer only one of the questions you most want to know. Of course, this doesn't mean it has no use at other times. Besides this question, if you want to gain any other information, you must read it yourself, trying to absorb the vast knowledge within. I don't know exactly how much content it contains, but it's definitely beyond your imagination. So make sure to grasp what you really want. Don't waste the opportunity it provides. I understand. Taking a deep breath, Heracles had not expected the Purgatory book to have such a stipulation. He then steadied his spirits and silently chose the second path. Although he didn't know if he would ever take the first path in the future, at least for now, the great hero preferred an answer with a higher probability. Having made his decision, the next moment, the page in Heracles' hand displayed only one of the split images, and an extra vial appeared above the remaining one. As the hero gazed at it, the empty vial gradually filled with a liquid. And as the liquid rose, Heracles' mind was also filled with corresponding knowledge. This was a special elixir, able to avoid the erosion and perception of the waters of the river of oblivion. Once he created it, it was as if the gates of the spirit realm had already opened for the great hero. But these ingredients, with a look of hesitation, Heracles' brow furrowed slightly. The other ingredients were manageable, but the main ingredient was not so common. Or rather, its very existence was but a legend. Your Highness Prometheus, have you ever heard of the golden apple? With a slight start, the forethinking god nodded immediately. I know, I have seen it too. Why do you ask? I want to know where the golden apple can be found, or at least something that has been touched by its strength. That is. After some contemplation, undoubtedly Heracles' question must relate to that book. The golden apple, if it was in the past, had to do with Mother Earth. But now it should belong to the divine court. So, was this enticing him to oppose the divine court? He didn't know if that was the case. Perhaps it was his own overthinking. However, after careful deliberation, Prometheus gave a roundabout answer. True golden apples, you might find them hard to come by, but merely something impregnated with its strength, I still know of. It is said that when the divine king wed the heavenly empress, Zeus gave Hera a branch of the golden apple tree. That was something that fell into his hands at the end of the second epoch, and the heavenly empress ultimately planted it, turning it into a small orchard. Nowadays, it's located on an island above the Western Sea, to the west of the mainland. The fruits it bears should be able to meet your needs. Nodding, the great hero breathed a sigh of relief. True golden apples were difficult to acquire, but this was manageable. His goal now finally had an outcome, and Heracles felt considerably lighter in spirits. Upon his return, he already knew what to do. However, Your Highness Prometheus, do you know about the god of West Wind? By rights, the other party still had a so-called trial to impose on him. Even though Heracles now hardly wished to complete the trial, he still planned to clarify this matter with the other party. Though Zeus' image had lately plummeted in his heart, whenever he thought that the other might be his father, the great hero's emotions grew complex again. Fortunately, he didn't need to deal with the divine king, and at his side, there was a deity who even knew the details of these matters. Do you mean Zephyrus? With a slight movement in his pale face, Prometheus wondered why the other would ask about the god of West Wind. Nevertheless, since Heracles asked, there was nothing that couldn't be said about Zephyrus. Achoo! At the same time, just as Heracles was about to begin his return journey, around Silver Moon City, with its beak agape, Zephyrus sneezed involuntarily. Strange, what sort of feeling was this? Could it be due to the recent detection causing some depletion in his body?